From Zen Master to Rage Monster. What happened when a patient man finally snapped? My grandfather is a nice, funny, flirty guy. Was an exec at a manufacturing business after being the third employee. Everyone gets along with him, and he's fairly well off in my small town. One day, my cousin and I are helping him with some paperwork, and we go to the store. There's a lot of poverty in my hometown, and one of the poorer families was at the store. My cousin makes some comment, he was kind of a teen brat at this point, about that family being poor and what were they doing at the store, because they couldn't buy anything, or something along those lines. My nice grandfather grabs him and slams him against the wall and says, "Nothing in your life makes you better than them. Right now, I'd rather have them buy me than you." He then makes my cousin go apologize, and my grandfather announces my cousin will pay for whatever they're getting. He pays and then makes my cousin work off the expenses for him to prove a lesson, and now that cousin is a stand-up social worker specializing in poverty, family mistreatment, and rehabilitation. The only time I've ever seen my grandfather be aggressive. Working in an auto parts warehouse, one of our managers was a very quiet, collected person. One particular day, some of the orders were wrong, and the ordering system was malfunctioning. He calmly goes back, starts up a forklift, and rams it full speed at a huge stack of wood pallets. He must have thrown it in reverse and repeated this about a dozen times, raising and lowering the forks appropriately. Everyone stopped working to watch as every last pallet was destroyed. When there was only a pile of wood scraps left, he turned off the lift and calmly walked back and continued working as if nothing had happened. My father, who had a legendary temper and never lost it in front of me, was sued for malpractice by this insane patient and the epitome of the ambulance-chasing lawyer. We were in the car, and we saw the lawyer, and my father said, very evenly, although boiling with rage, "If you weren't in this car, I'd crash it right into that piece of crap motherfricker." Even today, 40 years later, I believe he would have done it. That was scary. Gym class in high school. The quiet, nerdy kid kept getting picked on during dodgeball. One jerk kept hitting him with balls even though he was already out. The quiet kid wasn't tiny, he was about average-sized, maybe a little taller. He eventually lost his temper, ran across the court, and literally delivered a double-handed choke slam to the jerk. Being a bunch of teenage boys, we all lost our minds cheering him on. He got suspended for 3 days, but it was reduced to 1 day in school after a bunch of us went to the principal and explained the circumstances. You know, that's the closest I've seen to a school ever straying from a zero-tolerance policy, and I'll applaud it. Good on these kids for having that guy's back. My grandfather was a man who rarely talked and never rushed. He once had a completely silent argument with my significant other. They slammed the back door at each other until they broke the window in it. That said, he was a steel worker who worked for a moving company on the weekends. He was short but built like a brick house. When I was very young, I don't remember what led up to it, but I remember my father making my grandmother cry. Then I remember my grandfather charging like a bull, grabbing my father, and pitching him across the house. My dad made the smart decision and bolted as soon as he got up. That was the one and only time I saw my grandpappy lose his temper. When I was in high school, an upperclassman at my all-male student Catholic school followed a female teacher into the bathroom and tried to commit the unspeakable act. She screamed initially before he pulled a knife. The gentlest, most caring, socially awkward Latin teacher heard the scream and rushed from his classroom straight into the women's restroom. He clocked this kid across the face and dragged him out by his collar into the hall. Then he checked on the traumatized female teacher. Later, he went back to his class and continued teaching as though nothing had happened. The guy knows 7 languages and has never dated anyone, and is a brilliant, always calm man. People gained a lot of respect for him that day. He's still really weird, though. Twice in 20 years, I've seen the fury of my very patient, docile, and kind stepdad. The first time was when some 12th graders chased my brother and cousin all the way from school to our backyard, threatening their lives with pocket knives. Stepdad calmly walked to the backyard, grabbed the big kids by their throats and lifted them up, pinning them to the fence. "Stay the hell away from my kids," was all he said, in a calm, teeth-biting kind of way. Those kids booked it faster than I've ever seen anyone run and never bugged my brother or my cousin again. Then we all went inside and made burgers. The second time was in my angsty pre-teen years when I called my mother the B word. He turned at me and I've never been so scared in my life. This time he was red with rage and screamed at me until I was backed up against our bar counter, shielding myself with the bar stool legs. The second he backed off slightly, I booked it into my bedroom and barricaded myself in with all the furniture I could find. Didn't come out for a solid day until I got up the courage to apologize. But he's a teddy bear, normally. Pretty sharp teeth on that teddy bear. Worked at a retail store. My manager was a very kind and soft-spoken man, about 5'5", not scrawny but not built. I never saw him lose his temper, except once. A guy in another department was stocking shelves. Bill. And Bill was in a wheelchair. A huge, gnarly-looking guy comes up and starts arguing with Bill about whether or not they have this or that, and the guy loses his temper. Tries to pull Bill out of his chair to beat him up. I was further down the aisle, but I started towards them because frick you don't mess with Bill. Out of absolutely nowhere comes my manager. I mean, he flew out of thin air and tackled this huge punk to the ground. And after some fisticuffs, the butthole gave up and my manager literally sat on his head until the police arrived some 15 or so minutes later. My dad, about a decade ago while I was in high school. We lived on a hill, and if you go down the hill, it leads into the main part of town where all the shops and stuff are. And if you go up, over the other side, it's where a lot of the bars and clubs are. It's quicker to go over than around, obviously. Back then, my parents each had a car instead of sharing one, and only one space in the garage, and drunk idiots were constantly damaging my mum's car. Well, one day Dad happened to have a day off fall on his weekend, and he could hear a group of very drunk people walking up the road. His little office or computer room is at the very front of the house, so he gets up, goes out the front door, and just waits near the front lawn watching. They're being loud and pushing each other around. Mum's worried as heck and comes to get me because she doesn't want him to get hurt by some drunk idiot. And I go out to see what he's doing. They end up pushing each other around more, and one bumps into the car, or is leaning on it, I don't know, and Dad tells them to get away from it. They start taunting him, so he walks closer toward them, and one of the little jerkwads clean smashes the side mirror off while laughing at him. Dad is a 6'8" ex-basketballer, basically is just all-around frickin' massive and is small man-bait on a normal day. Dad hits the guy straight in the jaw, and you could see his jaw completely broke. The guy is immediately screaming and bawling his eyes out at the same time, whilst his friends pick him up and run away. Never heard from them again or got in any trouble for it. Dad just went back inside and watched TV. I worked with this theatre director who was well known for being one of the nicest and most intelligent people you can meet. But there was one actor in this show who was a grade A pain in the butt. She would constantly be late for rehearsals. Once she didn't show up at all. The reason was her girlfriend was in a car accident, but the problem was she didn't tell the stage manager, director, or anyone that she wasn't coming. We found out after the fact through Facebook. This was a show with some deaf cast members, so some hearing actors who didn't know ASL had to do some signing. So we brought an ASL instructor. This B-word, though. She apparently did know some ASL and thought she knew better than the college professor and would constantly try to correct her. We were doing spacing rehearsals in on one of our touring spaces with very limited time. This was 2 months into the rehearsal process, and the director had finally had enough of her having a backhanded comment for everything. He adjusts her blocking slightly, just because the space we're in is a bit different, and she starts to say something and the director just screams, "The show isn't about you, goddammit, Stacy!" And he throws his script on the ground so that pages fly everywhere. It's the first time any of us have ever heard him yell or curse in anger. She runs off stage crying. Then he calmly says, "Can we get back to work, please?" And then later, during a break, I overhear him talking to her about how he's going to tell everyone he knows in theatre never to hire her or work with her. I've met any number of fellow actors like this. There's a reason we meet most of them early in their theatrical careers, because if they keep up that behaviour, they do not last. Some of them do eventually make it and become Edward Norton, though. My uncle is the most peaceful person I know. He's essentially a living version of what would happen if you combined General Iroh, Bob Ross, and Dr. Dolittle. He keeps a garden, feeds wild birds out of the palm of his hand. He's been known to just walk up to deer without it running away. I've never heard him raise his voice except to talk to someone really far away in my entire life. He was in the military during Vietnam. I'm not sure what branch. He never saw a combat zone. He was the guy who fixed stuff that came back from a combat zone. The war ended, he went home and returned to his normal life working at a tire factory. One night he's getting off of a hard day at work and wants a drink. So he goes to the local bar. 3 guys are standing outside talking amongst themselves and he goes to walk in, but they stop him. He tells them that he doesn't want any trouble, he's just had a stressful day at work and wants to grab a drink. They go back and forth a while, and eventually he just pushes past them to get in. They didn't like that and pulled him back, where he proceeded to knock one unconscious and floor another one. The third backed off and let him inside. By the time he'd left, they were nowhere to be seen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I knew a girl who was living with a guy who had a severe anger management issue. He had kept it under control for the few years they'd lived together, but one day he snapped over some minor issue, hit her repeatedly, banged her face in the concrete, and tried to throttle her until a passerby stopped him. So obviously the relationship was over, and she was going to fetch her stuff from the apartment. She likewise, obviously, didn't want to go alone, so me, two other friends and her brother, who I also knew, tagged along to keep things in check and help carry stuff. When we arrive, her ex gives us attitude, which causes her normally extremely mild and docile brother to snap completely. He smacked the guy up against the wall with one hand and punched him repeatedly with the other, holding him up against the wall the whole time, because you don't hit someone who's down. We just stood there in shock and awe. Given the way the girl looked after the beating she had received, she was like black and blue, bruised, her entire face scraped, scratches on the neck and so on. We didn't mind much what was going on, and we just let him punch him out. Then we got her stuff and left as he started to wake up. 2 times during the following months, the ex was jumped twice when moving outdoors in the evening. I don't know who did it, and I don't want to know. I guess everybody has their trigger. My father-in-law is such a patient man. He's quiet, reserved, has a great sense of humor, when my mother-in-law lets him get any words in, and as for her, well, she talks. A lot. She'll ask you questions, and when you start to answer, she'll talk over you and tries to answer them herself. It's infuriating and obnoxious. One time she asked me a question, and I started to answer her, and she cut me off to basically finish my answer for me, and started to ask another question. Lather, rinse, and repeat for about 4 questions, and finally, my patient, quiet, sits back and watches the world father-in-law just explodes on her, basically screaming at her, "Oh my God, let her actually answer the questions you've asked. Stop interrupting, you never let anyone finish their thought." It was glorious, and I almost tackled him to hug him. She still does it, but that day was amazing. My dad was career Army as an officer. I've always known him as a soft-spoken, kind, never gets angry sort of person. He rarely ever raises his voice that I know of. There's a law in the US that basically protects any service member nearing 20 years from being forced out so that they can get full retirement benefits. One day, he gets a call from his commanding general telling him that he's going to be forced out due to budget cuts army-wide. My dad gets up out of his seat and starts yelling at the general on the phone that it was impossible due to the law since he was in the safe zone. He started quoting section after section, yelling at the general telling him he'd effed up and that it had better be fixed. A few days later, my dad got a call again from the same general, and the first thing the general said was, "Before you say anything, let me apologize for the other day, you were 100% correct." But budget cuts are budget cuts, and as soon as my dad hit 20 years, he was retired. When I was in elementary school, I was being bullied at recess, and the teacher and monitor wasn't doing anything about it. My dad didn't work a traditional office job, he made his own schedule, which let him have a lot of flexibility. After getting the runaround at the school, he was referred to some bureaucrat at the district offices. Well, this guy didn't want to meet my father, so despite my dad making an appointment, the guy wasn't in that day. Fun fact, that excuse doesn't work very well when you have labeled dedicated parking spots. The appointment was at 2 p.m., so my dad blocked the car in, rolled down the windows, pulled out a book and started reading. At around 7 p.m., he hears the cough of a man who wants to get someone's attention while not being obvious about it. Oh, look at that! The bureaucrat showed up to the office and is ready for his 2 p.m. appointment. I laughed. Okay, my dad has the patience of a saint. You never see him get angry or mouth off. He's quiet, calm, and so laid back. Pretty much like me. Even when we were kids, he never gave us a telling off at all. It was always Mum's job as she was strict. Anyway, we were at the dinner table and me and my siblings were all bickering, not sure about what. All of a sudden, my dad slams his fist on the table and shouts, "Shut up!" We all put our heads down in shock as we'd never experienced this before. One by one, we started to giggle. Even our mum started giggling. We were looking over to my dad, who was looking down at his plate, and all we could see was his shoulders going up and down, and of course, eventually he just burst out laughing. I think he shocked himself that day, but nobody could take it seriously. Honestly, I'm such a non-imposing figure that I think this is about the best I could hope for if I ever snapped at my family. Oh well, it's more desirable than having your loved ones be scared of you, I suppose. My father, like many of the ones described here, had infinite patience. 3 kids, horrible divorce, tough job, basically no free time at all. The 3 of us would have been aged roughly 14, 13, and 10 respectively. It was laundry day, and the 3 kids were on the landing, folding clothes and socks. We started bickering. My brother and I started shoving each other, playfully at first, but then with intent to maim. My sister started to cry, I think, or at least cry shouting at us to stop. My father was in the kitchen. Normally he'd come in, give us the crazy eyes, and calmly tell us to cut it out. For whatever reason, this one time something tweaked. He barged in, lightning fast, broke my brother and I up by tossing us a few feet in opposite directions like we were dolls. But not before making a hilarious scene by smashing a plastic bottle of Tums against the wall to get our attention. Bang! Then a hand grabs me and tosses me aside. He then berated us for not being able to get along while completing the simplest of tasks. We 3 sat there, dumbfounded as he yelled so loudly I remember seeing a new red vein in his neck, combined with a not insignificant amount of spittle from his mouth. Then, as quickly as it had happened, it was all over. He left, the house was quiet. A few hours later, he apologized, saying he was stressed out but that he wanted us to get along with each other now, so that when we were older we'd still be friends. And you know what? He was right. Getting along with your siblings, even grudgingly when you're young, more easily leads to becoming friends when you're adults. I'll just never forget the poor bottle of Tums that was sacrificed for me to understand. Rest in peace, Tums bottle. I didn't witness this, but my dad told me a story about his grandparents. My great-granddaddy and grandma were British. They came over sometimes in the 60s, I think. My great-grandpa fought in the Somme during World War I and got captured by the Germans and held as a prisoner of war, so he had been through some stuff. He was very quiet, generally very nice, but couldn't hear much. My great-grandma liked her sherry and was always nagging him and hassling him. So one day, my dad and his siblings were at my great-grandpa's house. My great-grandpa was sitting in his chair by the fire, smoking his pipe while my great-grandma was going on about something. He was generally just ignoring her, when she grabbed one of those fire pokers and threw it at him. He had his hands resting on the arms of his chair, and the poker got wedged into the chair right between his fingers. It didn't hit him, though. So my great-grandpa, quietly and unfazed, got up, pulled the poker out and put it back in its place, then sat back down and said, "Well, we won't be doing that again now, will we?" Apparently, my great-grandma was just petrified because he had never said anything remotely confrontational before. My little brothers are twins, fraternal. Mike is emotional, high-strung, and always getting himself in trouble because he can't keep his mouth shut. Pete is the exact opposite. Very calm, very rational, very quiet. At the time of this story, they were about 10. We lived across the street from the elementary school, and I was out of school, so I'd often chill on the front porch with a book and keep an eye on the kids across the street. One day, I hear Mike's voice start to spin up. I look up and he's facing down some kid, red in the face and about a step from swinging or crying. I'm not sure which. I get up and I start to head over, and I've just stepped onto the grass across the street when Mike's antagonizer says, quite clearly, "Your birth certificate was an apology letter from the termination clinic." The twins know what a termination is. Mike goes silent, shocked and hurt, and tears start to well up in his eyes. I'm furious, and a teeny part of me is laughing because holy crap, that one was new, but before I can say anything, here comes Pete, with a flying punch straight to the side of this kid's head. Knocked him right on his butt. Mike is shocked out of his tears. I'm flabbergasted over watching a 10-year-old perform an absolutely beautiful airborne sucker punch, and Pete stands over the kid, practically snarling until I make it up to them. The kid sees Pete is distracted by me walking up and takes off. I march the twins back home. "I'm kinda proud of you, dude," I tell Pete, "sticking up for your brother like that." Pete gives me the flattest look I've ever seen on a child. "I wasn't protecting him," he says. "That's my birth certificate, too." One of my school teachers was the most patient, kind man who'd work with you until you got something, even if it meant he had to miss his lunch. There was this girl who was a mouthy little brat. She'd mess around in his class repeatedly. He'd always keep his cool, even though she was being incredibly rude. Discipline never worked on this kid. I don't know how she didn't get expelled. One day she was drinking Coke in chemistry class and he repeatedly told her to stop because we were messing around with chemicals and there was a contamination risk. But she didn't listen. After months of this kid giving him crap, he slowly walked over to her desk, picked up her Coke and poured it over her head, and then walked back to the front of the class and carried on teaching. He got fired, much to our protestations. I mean, yeah, I have to admit that this is hard to justify to parents no matter how much of a monster that kid was. This is technically a physical attack on a student, and although many would sympathize with him, I do see why he unfortunately had to go. Maybe just confiscate the Coke next time. Greg vs. Jimmy. This one guy who was in our year at school was gigantic. We'll say his name was Greg. Greg hit 6 foot tall at the age of 15 and had a beard coming in a few years before that. He was intimidating as all heck, but he was the nicest guy you'd ever meet. I still have a ton of time for him all these years later. Genuine model of a good person. Anyway, he was being teased all year by this butthole of a boy. Let's call him Jimmy. Jimmy had some self-esteem issues and used to pick on younger kids constantly. But when he set his sights on gentle Greg, knowing he wouldn't retaliate, it got interesting. Jimmy was rarely in school, but would still hang about the school gates with about 6 or 7 pals, waiting for Greg to appear, then bolt when he finally did. One weekend we were all out street drinking, as you do, and Jimmy and co. jumped Greg. Greg went mental. A couple of Jimmy's pals held us back while Greg managed to knock 4 of the guys clean out before they brought him down. It was like watching the Hulk fight. Jimmy obviously bolted before the actual fighting began. The next Monday at school, he was back to his usual self again, or so it seemed. I didn't witness the next part myself, but I wish I did. Greg hit Jimmy with an uppercut so forceful that he was launched across a school desk and was advised to leave education. Justice. Now I'm imagining Jimmy rocketing across the desk and landing at the foot of an official who shakes his head and intones, "Boy, I advise that you leave education." What is the smartest or most creative way of cheating that a student used? I remember a story from my chem professor. This student, all semester, who wasn't showing up to a class, kept getting his score improved significantly after regrades. They got their tests back and had a day to review them, and were allowed to resubmit for a regrade. They knew he was cheating because of the unlikelihood of the grading mistakes on multiple exams, but the TAs who graded it couldn't confidently say that it wasn't their handwriting. Ultimately, it was an office worker for the department who figured it out near the end of the semester. His staples were angled differently than the exams handed out that were mass stapled. He was recreating the test, printing it, re-answering it, and then grading it in the same pen as the TAs, and had done a good job copying the writing style. Not sure if this would work anymore, but if I had a paper to write on a book I didn't read, I'd find a well-written paper online, then translate the entire thing from English to German, German to French, French to Spanish, then Spanish back to English. Pull the original paper and the new one up side by side and clean up the grammar on the new paper, and you've got the same concept, just written different enough to not be plagiarism. Worked like a charm back then. My teacher shared with us a story about how since she allowed eating during her tests, one person pulled out a giant bag of M&Ms and ate a specific color corresponding to A, B, C, or D. It was a 2-student duo and they only got caught when another student ratted them out. I was supervising a final chemistry exam along with another coworker. Not 15 minutes in, a hand slams down on a desk and I turn around expecting the worst, only to see my coworker angrily shouting at a pair of really frightened 10th graders whose desk he'd smashed. Amidst the shouting, I caught the words Morse code. The guy proceeded to take them to the office. I called a hallway supervisor to take over and ran after the group. Apparently the kids were silently tapping their fingers amongst themselves in Morse code. Not even with their fingernails, just their fingertips. I never heard a thing. My coworker happened to catch B in Morse code or something. I honestly thought he went crazy solely because of his appearance. Picture Robin Williams in Jumanji going, "What year is it?" I'm 100% sure that if this coworker weren't in the room, they'd have gotten away with it for sure. In elementary school, we had to write a paragraph each week featuring all the vocabulary words included in that unit. One clever kid wrote something along these lines. One day, Brian had to write a paragraph for English class. He sat down, picked up a pen, and used these words in it, and he proceeded to list out all the words. The teacher only let it go once because she had never seen that happen until then. In a lot of my college courses, I wasn't allowed to use anything higher than a TI-84. So I took the guts out of my TI-89 and swapped it into my TI-84. I never got caught. I'm amazed that apparently different calculators of very different capacity can use an identical chassis right down to the keyboard. Or at least that's what this answer implies. Crazy. We had one teacher, probably 2005-ish, who barely spoke English. A couple of the guys would just take an article, swap the first and last halves of each sentence and hand it in. Because he spoke the most broken English, he was Chinese, he wasn't able to distinguish it from proper English. This is before the anti-plagiarism tools we have today. I have a rare case of a teacher who hacked the system, if that's applicable. So the teacher, let's call him Mr. A, had a reputation for being a phenomenal teacher who had every student engaged and invested in his class, no matter how mundane the subject. Anytime he asked a question, every student's hand would shoot in the air, with them shouting things like, "Call on me," or "I know the answer." Simply, Mr. A developed a reputation in the district as one of its best teachers. Fast forward a couple of years and I was grabbing a coffee with Mr. A, and I asked him, "What's your trick? How did you get every student bought in?" His response was, "Well, I told the kids every time we had a visitor in class, I need you all to raise your hand like I'm giving away free candy. But if you don't know the answer, raise your left hand. If you do know it, raise your right hand. That way I know who to call on and we all look good." It worked like a charm. One of my old teachers told us a story about a student who had rigged up a tiny scroll of paper in a wristwatch with notes written on it. He turned the scroll by winding the watch. He ended up getting caught because he was winding his watch so aggressively during the exam, but the teacher loved the creativity. In high school, I was in a computer-based learning program and our science tests were taken digitally. They used a program where once you entered the test, your entire screen was locked into the test, and the only way to exit it was to click the Finish button on the test or turn off your computer, which effectively did the same thing. Another feature of the program was that once you were in the test, anything you had in your clipboard, like copied text, was not able to be pasted onto the answer sections on the test to prevent the only other way to cheat. However, after creating my own classroom at home, making fake tests and playing with the program to figure out a way to cheat, I realized it would allow you to copy things from the inside of the test and paste them elsewhere in the test. The developer of the program also didn't take into account the sign-in screen where you have to find the test and enter it. Long story short, I could copy my entire page of notes I'd taken on the test material, paste it into the section where I would enter my login information, then recopy it, enter the test and paste it again, and in one of the answer sections, use it to answer every question, then delete it before clicking Finish. I work as a web developer for a college. Stuff like this makes me paranoid about everything I do. Some smart Alex CS tried to break everything in our portal one semester just out of boredom. Best student worker I've ever had. I think the person asking the question for this video is a student crowdsourcing cheating strategies, and therefore this is one of the most creative ways of cheating that I've seen. Either that or he's a teacher. I used to use one of those rectangular erasers because the pencils the teacher gave us were cheap and the erasers only smudged the marks. The eraser came in a cardboard sleeve and I ripped it open and would write test answers on it and then erase it after the exams for reuse. My exams that used a graphic calculator, a TI-84, required us to show the examiners a proof of reset screen before the papers started. So instead of actually studying for my papers, I painstakingly redrew the proof of reset screen pixel by pixel in the TI-84's pixel art program and stored all of my notes in it. In college physics, a girl with a really intricate tattoo on her leg wrote formulas in between the tattoo lines. Even looking closely, you couldn't tell unless you knew what you were looking for. You could tell it was a test day because she wore shorts. High school kids recreated a Snapple label where the nutrition panel on the back had all of the answers, formulas, stuff like that. They only got caught because I'd never seen the flavor before and I wanted to see how much sugar was in it. Everyone knows you cheat using peach Snapple, you idiots. I can name the worst, and I've definitely shared it here before, but it wasn't my student, it was a friend's. She had downloaded a worksheet for the kids to do while she was in a meeting of some sort. The kids found the worksheet's answer sheet online and proceeded to copy the answers. The last answer said, "Student responses will vary," and that's what one kid wrote for his answer. Other times you'll see one kid misspell something or get an answer wrong, and everyone who copied from him has the same error. This happened to our entire group of chem students last year. Everyone in the classes was cheating on the homework because the answers were always online. In the second semester, someone made the mistake of writing "answers may vary," and the teacher finally realized we were all cheating. A classmate broke the screen and keyboard of his calculator and hid his cell phone in it so it wouldn't be seen from the teacher's position. The teacher approached him from behind and then caught him. I had a friend who knew Kurdish and Turkish. We all know Turkish where I'm from. Anyway, he had to move from his city due to an earthquake and come to the opposite side of the country, in Istanbul. He was writing his notes in Kurdish on his desk and one desk in front of him. Since none of us or the teachers knew Kurdish, it was like gibberish to us, but we knew he was writing down notes in Kurdish. Feels like you could have solved that pretty easily by just making him sit at a different desk for the test, but I can't fault him for using what he had to his advantage. I passed a pop quiz in high school by looking across the room and focusing on the top of the smart girl's pencil and trying to decipher if she wrote A, B, C, or D after the teacher asked each question. It actually turned out to be more successful than I thought it would. Also, I'm all about academic integrity when it comes to important higher education when relative to your field of work, but I don't understand loading immense amounts of needless information into young, hormonal teenagers and getting upset or surprised that they don't have the mental stamina to deal with it at all and would rather cheat. So, as a teacher, the smartest way I cheat is by giving the kids a note card and telling them that they can put whatever cheat stuff on it they want. It tricks them into actually studying for their math tests. This is a very common trick that many teachers use and have been using for decades. Also, a pro tip from a math teacher: most students don't know how to study for math, and this is why they struggle. Think of studying math like practicing an instrument. You need to learn a piece by practicing multiple problems from a skill set. If you aren't practicing at least 8 to 18 problems at least every day or two, then you're never going to get past the little mistakes and missteps which have probably plagued you. I witnessed probably the biggest cheating-related scandal in our high school's history. For context, we had the sweetest old guy as our chem teacher. He called everyone bud or buddy or ma'am. He always helped. He volunteered to teach driver's ed after school so kids could learn to drive. He always had a twinkle in his eye because he genuinely showed love and kindness to everyone. A side effect of this was that he was very trusting. So one day, before finals, he ran to the bathroom during class while everyone was wrapping up their lab reports. While he was gone, someone ran to his desk, found the finals just sitting there, snapped a pic and then ran back to their desk before he got back. Somehow, nobody tattled, probably because 90% of our grade level in that class was on board with it. The pictures got texted around, but a few people were smart enough to Bluetooth into each other so that it couldn't be tracked. Well, after the test, everyone had high scores and apparently someone confessed. This resulted in a huge investigation by the assistant principals, school police officer, and faculty. They traced every text message and busted so many people, except for the ones who had transferred via Bluetooth. They had to reissue that test. It was crazy. I felt really bad for the teacher. He was really sad someone had taken advantage of him, and I was too. He was such a good dude. And to clarify, the school didn't need to trace the messages. They just had 1v1 interviews with the school cop nearby, so kids would feel pressured to snitch. Apparently a few cracked under the pressure, but if I recall correctly, a fair number got away with it. Also, the cop was our school cop. Real badge, weapon, car. He was just there to protect us against any number of the things that threaten you as a high school student in America. He patrolled for loiterers as well, ran substance searches, ran security for after-school events and pep rallies, so no actual police force was present, just this guy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was grading a written assignment that had a 1,000 word count minimum, and one particular paper just felt really short to me despite Word telling me it was roughly 1,100 words long. On a hunch, I hit Ctrl-A, and sure enough, after the paper concluded, there was a lot of white nonsense text on a white background. I used a text file on one of the original iPods. The teacher was fine with listening to music during tests. It made my life so much easier. I'm not a teacher, but one of my friends in high school wrote all the physics equations we needed to know in a really tiny font on Jolly Rancher wrappers. I had summaries of chemistry and a load of math formulas on my graphic calculator, a TI-83, and I had a backup on a thumb drive so that I could put it back after a mandatory reset. My girlfriend works for a dental exam company, which is obviously super high-stakes exams. Since the exams are worldwide, they actually have found people from one time zone paying people from another time zone to email questions to them right before the exam starts. Stretch a rubber band around a textbook, write whatever you want on it, then when you take it off the textbook, it'll just look like a scribble until you stretch it to see what's written. Spanish conjunctions drove me to do some incredibly unethical things. How would you use that without looking suspicious? You could say it's a fidget thing, but it's risky. You've got to establish a precedent before the exam. Have a rubber band in class every day. I had a class in the morning with a kid who was a TA for my physics class the afternoon before. It was a weird period system at my old school. He had told me the answers to app tests he had graded the day before, and I'd write them in black ink on the side of my sole on my black boots. I'd then sit with my leg bent with my foot on my knee and read the answers during the test. You couldn't see them unless the light hit the ink just right. After the test, I'd just lick my finger and smudge the answers out. A classmate was printing the answers on his paper in very pale grey so that it barely could be seen. Still got caught because the teacher noticed him reading an empty sheet. Physics professor posted the answers to the homework online after it was due. The thing was, he was just making the existing pages visible and the URLs followed a simple and predictable format. If you knew the URL, you could look at it before it was made public. I'm a high school teacher, but this was about my own high school math teacher playing us and cheating. It was an honours algebra and geometry class, and it was well known that Mr. D reused the same questions every year and just changed the numbers. He made a big deal about making sure we all gave our exam papers back to him after we'd looked at our scores and gone over everything together to prevent cheating for the next year. Well, of course, some of my classmates got their hands on a complete set of tests from the previous year. Soon, everyone had a set. Before each exam, we'd sit together and make sure we knew how to solve every problem on that test so we could do it on the real exam with different numbers. Years later, when I became a teacher myself, I saw Mr. D at a funeral. I confessed to him that this is what we used to do. He smirked and said, "Who do you think leaked the test packet to get you to study?" Mr. D had figured out that kids won't study if the teacher suggests it, but if they think they're getting away with something, they totally will. So he managed to get a test packet out and circulating as contraband. Blew my mind. Writing down math formulas and putting them in the instructions insert of the calculator. Most recently, kids will put the answers on their smartwatches. It's to the point where I make all students remove their watches and place them on the classroom counter before the test starts. Yep, kids putting answers in their smartwatches does seem like the next logical step in the grand history of cheating, but speaking even in 2025 when they've been out for a while, the narrator is a little mind-blown that apparently so many kids have this very expensive accessory. Or is this just me channeling my Principal Skinner and being completely out of touch with the kids of today? How many of you have smartwatches? I don't even have a smartwatch. During a spelling test, "Miss, how do you spell piano?" The spelling word was piano. The teacher went on autopilot and started spelling the word for the class. My sister-in-law is a teaching assistant at her kid's school. Her youngest daughter, my niece, was 7 at the time. She stole the test the night before, pretended it was homework and had her mum help her with her homework, then snuck the answers into the test. One of the other kids caught her, let the teacher know, and my sister-in-law, who was overseeing test conditions, died inside when she realized it was the homework sheet that she had filled out. As a student, I remember when my entire year level was accused of cheating, as the test results came back consistently high. What the teachers failed to realize was that some of the answers were actually hidden in the other questions. So if you got stuck on one question, you could actually find the answer later on in another one. An example would be, "This is a Japanese language test. What does this word mean?" And then later on, a question would use that word in context, so you'd understand what it meant. I remember in middle school, we'd rely on the one kid who actually studied. Most of the quizzes our teachers gave us were multiple choice, so if the answer was A, the kid would cough, if the answer was B, he'd sniffle, and if the answer was C, he'd sigh, and if the answer was D, he'd stretch in his seat. Everyone in my science class was eventually that kid. Every time there was a quiz, a different person in the class would study. I used my programmable calculator to write a program for every possible math or physics question that gave me every step of the problem-solving sequence along the way. They always said, "Show your work." When I was in high school, I bought a pen with a window in it. There was a logo and text on the inside of this window, and each time you clicked the pen, the message inside would flick over to something else. I took it apart and was able to tape paper over this spinning tube and fit things that I would need to help me on some quizzes and tests. I used to lightly write the answers on a desk before the test with pencil. If someone calls you out on it before the test, then you claim it's from writing down notes during class and you didn't notice it was marking the desk. After using the necessary material, you just robbed the pencil marks off the desk, thus destroying the evidence. Printing a fake water bottle label with test information on it. Back in the mid-2000s, schools here in Australia started to have strict guidelines on what could be brought into exams. Water was allowed, but must be kept in a non-labeled bottle. If you bought water, you had to rip off the label. As a student, we used to wear uniforms and leather shoes. As mine's a beta pair, I usually write on them with black ink pens. When the tests came, I angled it just enough to be seen by sunlight. Also, the edges of our uniform button-down shirts were filled with formulas. I heard a story from my friend of a teacher who caught two kids cheating through Morse code by blinking. During an advanced placement US history test in high school, we had a question asking about the author of a book. A kid raised his hand and says, "Miss Krabappel, I read the name of the book this weekend and I really liked it." The teacher, obviously forgetting that she had put this question on the test, replies with, "Oh, by author's name? I love that book." The whole class burst out laughing, but nobody said anything because she had just given us the answer to the test question. Here are the methods that I used back in the day. I wrote formulas on those pens that had roll-out calendars. I almost got caught when I accidentally lost my grip and the calendar rolled back in the pen in such a loud way that my classmates looked at me. I also wrote formulas on my clothes and body, the hem of my shirt, and the part of my legs that gets covered by a sock. I put a couple of chapters on the notebook app in my old BlackBerry. I did this by hand, which involved me copying straight from the book to my phone. I put answers in the song lyrics on my iPod, but I didn't do this frequently. I forget why. It was either because my school cracked down on technology, like phones, iPods, or laptops, or that I just had a hard time scrolling with ClickWheel. We'd straight up swap papers. I think I only did it during trigonometry, because during exams we were arranged alphabetically, and I was seated next to this dude who was really good at math. I was afraid of doing this, but the fact that we were so close to each other made it less scary, so I did it. The only time I got caught was when this new teacher noticed that I kept taking out my handkerchief, which had a 1x1 piece of paper that had some formulas. In hindsight, if I'd pulled a bit of sleight of hand, I would have never been caught. The funny thing is, the year before, I cheated on a test with 2 letter-sized papers. I've not tried this method yet, and I don't think anyone here did, but there's a certain level of hertz in sound that only people below a certain age can hear. There are devices that play that kind of sound, so if the teacher is old, he or she won't hear the sound. Using that, the students can communicate with Morse code and such. I thought about this, and it's not very practical or useful, but it's very creative, so I thought about sharing my idea. One time, my class straight up asked the teacher for the answer to the first multiple choice, and she jokingly said, "Oh, I don't know, C," and then come test time we informed her that she actually gave us the right answer. Music students using music sheets as answer sheets for other students. The notes equal the same as the answers for the Scranton tests. One guy photocopied an article out of National Geographic, complete with the magazine headings and page numbers, and turned it in as his own work. Oh no, wait, that was the dumbest. What are your night shift horror stories? I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and I saw this guy walk past, stop for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walk back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging around the gate and I usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule. If it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with someone potentially hostile or messing with the locals. Let me tell y'all, he just stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. The same dead-eyed expression staring right into my soul. I did a round and then came back to find him gone, which to be honest only creeped me out more. I worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10, if they said no, he'd flash them his old wrinkly, crusty package. I had to chase him off every night so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks, as if I hated homeless people or treated them like trash all the time. In actuality, I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. As a teen, I used to close down the combo gas station and truck stop that I worked at alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 p.m. when he should be at home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's numbers are still in my phone. Anyway, he's currently on trial for murdering a working girl back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Ugh. I worked a parking garage at the airport. I was cleaning the top deck and then I noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. I took my flashlight, expecting something awful. I noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going to a hole they'd torn open and then popping back out covered in gunk. Some guy had left a broke-down beater car with a couple of animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. I checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November and it was April, so everything was just thawing and breaking down. I called my boss, who calls maintenance, to get a crew out there. They had the airport police come over and do an investigation to make sure there were no human remains. Some trophy hunter flew in, bought a cheap truck, caught what he wanted and left the rest for us to deal with. Didn't even bother to register or update the vehicle title, so the guy who sold it got a knock on the door from the cops. So after 5 months in a car, that was a tasty slurry you had in the back there. I imagine you couldn't tell where one animal ended and the other began. I imagine that would be the last day at work for a few people if they found that. Ugh. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks' home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some butthole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper, knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. I used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part, this wasn't really a problem. Typically, nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except for that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning and the woman was wearing a really nice dress. Anyway, I guess there was also this one time a young lady came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I'd just gotten off my first break. She was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits, a gi. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get as well. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning, and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them, a fricking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come and check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, he had made a nest in the insulation where he fell asleep. The guy was in bad shape too, like so far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around insulation after that, at least for the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Working late at an ice rink, I'm a Zamboni driver. It's a local rink with 2 sheets of ice. I get a phone call from my coworker. He's calling me on the Zamboni. It's loud, but I can clearly hear him yelling, "There's blood, a lot of blood, oh God!" And he hangs up. So I start running. I tear into his arena, and the ice is indeed covered in blood. Like seriously, so much. Then I realized how stupid we were. Well, more him than me. When he started resurfacing the ice, a hydraulic line to his board brush blew and started spewing out red hydraulic fluid. It looked like crimson blood on the ice. I ran onto the ice and told him to pull off. He was frazzled and driving in circles. Since he lost hydraulic pressure, he couldn't pull his conditioner up when trying to get off the ice. Ruined the blade on the Zamboni, but there wasn't much else he could do. Couldn't leave it on the ice. I told him it was hydraulic fluid, not blood. But he should check for dead bodies around the rink anyway. The best part was, after he got off the ice with fear in his eyes and adrenaline pumping, he said, "Hey, can you call our boss and tell him?" "No, it's 2 in the morning. It broke on you, so you have to call him. That's how it works." I watched the light die a little in his eyes. Many, many years ago, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of fricking nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator. Keep the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night when the roo shooters came through. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me, barefoot and half asleep, when this 6-foot kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog, and the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking stuff off the desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I run and open the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside, where I'm assuming the poor kangaroo was shot. And then I had to call my boss. I was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shiftily, then came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said, yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. But that seemed strange given that it had just gone midnight. Nope, he wanted us to let him in and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently, he had tried it in the past, as security recognized him instantly. I was running the register at a 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running into produce, carrying a mop handle, screaming, "You motherfricker!" Out of sight, he kept yelling, "Motherfricker!" and smacking something with the mop for like 5 minutes. I was ringing up customers and freaking out because he was losing his mind, but I wasn't interested in getting involved in a murder, so I just ignored it. Later, I found out he was chasing a rat. Warning, medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of the one guy who went 75 miles per hour on his motorbike into asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of crowfab we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility, all of the blood, those weren't even the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all, yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Okay, so up until now, the narrator was under the impression that if you were bitten by a rattlesnake, the poison would just sort of kill you internally, and that was that. Now after this story and a Google search, I've been faced by the unpleasant reality that if we're bit by one, we do in fact bleed from every part of the body that can bleed until we crap ourselves to death. Lovely. Many years ago, I'd briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world was at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been completely called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I had no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning, because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, with squad cars everywhere, absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. It was just a creepy, unsettling experience. I did hospital security for about 2 months. It was a small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferred into the morgue freezer. We'd just brought a decedent to the morgue, and right before we were able to transfer them to the freezer, their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time it gave us a decent fright. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked in a residential treatment center. One person with some severe trauma, like the unspeakable act, came sleepwalking into the room screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because, quote, he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks, and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door, coming straight at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley face balloon. That second scenario just sounds like the fake out in a horror movie before you turn around and the actual murderer is standing right there. Leaving one night from work, I was followed by a log truck, and it kept going faster and faster until I was at 100 miles per hour. I pulled off as the truck blew past my car, rocking it. Thing was, there was twisty turns ahead. And then I couldn't find the truck. Nope, he wasn't experiencing brake failure. This was on an uphill, on which the route was slow and progressively uphill. I'm not on the Grapevine or 4th of July pass. I was just hauling butt. They were running bobtail. Usually, if a truck loses brakes, the driver would probably engage the engine brakes and downshift. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late and I'd been out for over 24 hours at this point. I pulled into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away so that I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mack things are loud. As I was nodding off, there was a very loud bang and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily, I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe, rear, headlight, and started looking around and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the crap out of me. Needless to say, I never sleep anywhere other than a lit parking lot now. This was more of a very weird event. Sometimes I work night shifts. One time I was going home around 4 a.m. or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. A person on a bike came out of nowhere and said he remembered me from middle school. He even said the right school name, and then just rode off. Used to work night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough in the daytime, but they become weird after midnight. Once I had an elderly guy come in wearing only a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in, and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. These plastic barriers that all stores have during COVID to protect cashiers, they need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of the amount of times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, or rashes. Ugh. One of the managers came through the drive-thru at 4 a.m, drunk, and ordered an absurd amount of food, and then blew chunks out the window of whoever's car it was onto the drive-thru. Turns out she was the manager that was starting at 7 and said not to worry about the vomit and that she'd clean it up when she started. The amazing thing is that she arrived on time and cleaned it up. Not a horror story for me, but sure as heck one for her. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late, pitch black outside, and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage, not really talking, just taking care of business, when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. What the frick? Then it went by again and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair, wearing pajamas and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high and grinning. What the frick? It sounds kind of funny, but it was creepy as heck. We made eye contact, and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there, staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I am your savior, Jesus Christ!" No one responded, and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him, and security was called. They weren't impressed. Turns out he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theater at night. Okay, my money was on college prank, but that's far more concerning. At least he doesn't seem to have been dangerous, right? Is that the most literal messiah complex we've ever heard of? Although I'd guess that people actually believing they're Jesus is probably its own condition. I was walking through the simulation lab for nursing students at the hospital I work at on very little sleep. All the lights were off and it was my first time working night shift. I turned a corner and saw what I thought was a person standing behind a lamp that was on. Turns out it was a mannequin holding the pull cord. It really freaked me out and I was awake after that. I was closing supervisor at a grocery store and someone managed to take a dump between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59. We close at 9. You'd think, oh, there's literal poopy on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No. Instead, they continue to plow through it, so there's now crap on multiple grocery carts, the exit is scattered with feces, there's doo-doo on people's shoes undoubtedly, and there's scat in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise, had also been made brown on. For the record, human excrement makes me immediately gag and throw up whenever I get a whiff of it, so I ended up blowing chunks in the trash next to the crapper exit. I worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift. I got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that he was tied up in a room, his privates were tied up with leather straps, and his wife was getting railed by 5 other guys in another room. I asked him each time if he was in distress, and he said, no. Every time. I kept telling him that if he's not in distress, then he shouldn't be calling, and then I let him go. I just can't believe he was up at 12 through 6 to make those calls. It was 3 a.m. Popular Canadian coffee shop. There was one old baker in the back that rarely interacted with me past a dirty joke or dirtier ditty from his Navy days. Other than that, I'm completely alone. Not another soul around the area, and I expected it to remain so for at least an hour yet. I was boxing up the day-old food for the homeless shelter when I swear I see something out of the corner of my eye. It's behind me. I turn and then look down. There's a small child standing there. A native little toddler with a faux hawk staring at me intensely. I'm struck dumb with how absurd the situation is. How did he get behind the counter? I didn't hear the door open or see him come through the counter. I scanned the storefront. No one. I yell for the baker in case he has a friend or something visiting their lost kid. He comes over and, like me, does a double take at the kid and is baffled. The kid starts muttering incoherently. I get him a glass of water and a donut hole, and the baker runs out of the store to do a perimeter check of the block. I call the non-emergency line and explain that I have a little kid with no parents. I can't get any information from the boy, who just mumbles, and I can't make out what he's saying. The police arrive, the baker comes back and says he can't find anyone else in the streets. The guy from the 24/7 store said he'll keep an eye out. The police try to chat to the kid and also get nothing but mutterings and half-hearted gestures, and they take him away. I see them again for their morning coffee, and they told me the little guy walked several kilometers from the nearest reservation in the dead of night to my store. He'd got into his parents' medicine cabinet and then just walked out of the house. I was floored. It must have taken that poor baby hours to get to me. Seeing him behind me like that in the dead of night still shakes me to this day. It spooked me more than the guy that threw a pot of coffee at me, or the woman that tried to shank me with a plastic spoon because I refused to give her a metal one, and the guy that waited around 4 hours hoping to catch me alone so he could teach me a lesson since I didn't have the flavor of bagel he wanted. Ugh. People are the worst, by the way. I worked night shift at a large grocery store, one that wasn't open overnight but had a skeleton crew to work the loads and do prep and clean. I worked near the entrance, large glass doors but visually blocked off from my vantage point. Around 3 a.m. I hear knocking on the doors. This isn't completely uncalled for. Usually it's someone coming in for an early shift but didn't have a keycard. Sometimes it's food delivery or sometimes a customer who thinks we're open despite clearly being closed. I approach the door. It's a man that I don't recognize, wet from the rain. He looks normal enough, but something about him unnerved me. He had that vibe to him. You know, the one where it seems like they're on their way to becoming a full-blown crystal addict. But for now, they still managed to give the appearance of functionality. He was holding his crap together just enough to appear normal, but the edges were definitely shaky. Anyway, without unlocking the door, I announced the store was closed. He told me that he just needed my help. His car had broken down in the parking lot and he needed a boost. I didn't drive, so I told him I couldn't help him. I should have walked away there, but he was out in the rain and I did legitimately feel bad, so I told him I'd see if anyone of our few remaining crew did drive. I found someone who was willing to help and got the night crew manager involved as well. We went out. It turns out he was parked a bit off the entrance in a fairly secluded spot, and he had a lady with him. There was a similar vibe with her. Almost, but not exactly normal. It didn't click right away, but I figured they'd been hooking up in the car in the parking lot and maybe left the radio or lights on and drained the battery. To me, that explained the weird, unnerving feeling. They either felt ashamed or guilty, and it was showing through. Anyway, my coworker goes over to help give them a boost. The manager and I stay out there with him, nearby, watching. The two lovebirds kept peeking over at us uncomfortably. After a few moments, the coworker returns from the car and hurries us back inside. We don't see them drive off, which seems odd. We get inside, lock up again, and then the coworker thanks us for staying out there with him and not leaving him alone with them. He also caught on to the unnerving air about them, and it made him worried. What worried him more was when it also turned out that there was nothing wrong with the car. What's the most absurd thing that happened in an escape room? A kid I knew from school, his family owns an escape room business. The ongoing issues is just people trying to take things when they're clearly nailed down or nailed to the wall. He did mention, though, that a little kid peed in one of the prop bottles. I attended a Saw series-themed escape room with my significant other and some randos, since the room required 4 to 6 people. We got locked in to start, chained to fixtures like the darkroom scene from the movie. The lights are off. As soon as the thing starts up, one of the randos says, "I have a piece in case we need to shoot someone." I thought he was joking. We all did. Eventually, the lights turn on and he pulls out a real gat and sits it in the sink and says, "I'm leaving this in the sink in case something happens to me. This is for everyone." I did an escape room with a group of friends. At the end, you found a flash drive which was supposed to be plugged into a computer. We opened the document and there was instructions to print out. We started to print and then the printer gave us an out of ink error. We assumed this was part of the game and started looking for a magenta cartridge. Then an employee slipped into the room, replaced the cartridge, and told us to hit print again. Apparently it wasn't part of the game, they just ran out of ink. One time our players were doing the bank heist theme, done in the dark and you have headlamps, and about 4 puzzles in, one of my employees realized that they'd had an item in their pockets still. So we brain blasted for a couple of minutes and decided the best course of action was to pretend the employee was a security guard and walk around the bank. So we went over the room intercom and warned them to hide because it looked like a security guard was coming into them. Seeing all of the players hide in complete fear was priceless. One guy wasn't even hiding, he was just sprawled up against the wall. Our, quote, security guard walked around, said, everything seems good, and placed the item down on the desk. It was legendary that they didn't suspect anything. I had a group of drunk guys go in and they ran through their allotted hints pretty quickly. They asked for another hint and we said over the speakers that they were out of hints. One of the guys started threatening to take his clothes off until we gave him another hint. We didn't even have to give him the extra hint though. His friends chilled him out and ended up finding the next clue pretty shortly after that. I did an escape room with my family and now the workers are obliged to tell you not to lick the light bulb. This is because some guy thought if he licked the light bulb, the answer would be revealed on it. The only answer he found was that light bulbs are hot and can burn your tongue. It's always funny to think that every completely unnecessary rule had an absolute moron who's the reason it was put in place. The same is true with HR policies. Don't be the reason HR is a policy on anything, folks, unless you want everyone in the office to remember you for the rest of time. I went to one where there were 3 identical rooms where teams competed at the same time. If you finished, then you got to watch and listen to the other teams. Our team did pretty well and we got to watch the other 2 teams try to complete it. Anyway, there was this one lock which is a number combination and you solve it by finding some sheet music in a book with 5 notes on it, which corresponded to numbers. The piece was entitled The Key or something similar, so you knew you needed it for a something. Anyway, this other team, instead of converting to numbers and putting in the combination, chanted this 5-note tune at the lock. When it didn't work, they tried it again, and then someone else tried. This went on for 10 minutes and got louder and louder. Eventually, the game master stepped in and told them it was not going to work. Apparently, they were the only team ever to do that. My buddy guessed a locks combo, which gave us the final clue, but we hadn't found the other ones. We ended up solving the room backwards. When the room administrator came in, she had nothing else to say but, "What the frick did you guys do?" The first thing I had to learn working at an escape room was that everything, yes everything in the room was going to be dismantled, pulled on, or messed with in some way. You've got a screwdriver in the room? Maybe there's a clue in the light switch cover. Black light? Must have to take it completely apart. TV for clues? Must have to unplug and change the inputs. And anything not nailed down is bound to be broken. My friend worked in an escape room and he told me that some guys tried to smash a hole in the wall to get out because it was an Alcatraz-themed room. Me and my husband love escape rooms and wanted to share our love of them with our family. When we got out of the escape room, the super amazing nuclear explosion room in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the room operator was cracking up laughing. I guess at one point, in order to get the keys or clues, my over-enthusiastic husband had picked up my 8-year-old nephew by the ankles upside down and was shoving him in barrels. I had no idea he was doing this, but the operator was dying. My husband's family isn't much better. We did an underwater submarine one where you have to escape before you drown in Atlanta. My mother-in-law was hyperventilating in the fake escape room pod with her seatbelt on. As players, we walked into the pirate-themed escape room and there was treasure on the floor, a cannon, a parrot, scattered maps, and a piano. My friend was like, "Oh cool, I can play some backing music." Proceeds to play Pirates of the Caribbean theme, and clunk. The door unlocks and the game is over. The whole point was to solve puzzles to collect pieces to the music sheet of the theme. Best 30 seconds and 20 euros ever spent. Oh god, my time has come. People do dumb stuff in escape rooms constantly, but that's the whole point and it's usually in good fun. The best part of my old escape room job was that it was literally right next door to a brothel. People would frequently come to our door not realizing that they were one door over from where they wanted to be, and they'd ask, "Hey, how much?" I said in my customer service voice, "Well, it depends how many people you bring. It's $40 each if you're a group of 2, then it goes down to $32 each if you're a group of 8. Usually we recommend groups of 4 to 6 people. That seems to be the sweet spot. Their looks of horror will make me laugh forever." I work at an escape room and too many customers come into play and put the torches in their mouth. Disgusting. We had a couple get in the room and start to get frisky instead of playing the game. Had one who was super drunk and just started to pee in the corner of the room. Another lady who had been drinking decided to stay in the room and throw up everywhere, and then put props to cover up the mess instead of leaving the room to go to the toilet, and many others. One time, a group was trying to figure out the code to a locked compartment. So this huge guy in the group decided this was a waste of time and tried to rip off the component door with his bare hands. He was almost successful, but we stopped him before he could do further damage to the door. He didn't understand what he'd done wrong. Another one happened where a group were handcuffed and they couldn't find the key. The game master was trying to give them clues to find the key, but they still couldn't find it. So, one group member thought it would be the best to use his leg. There was a table in the room with some items on it. He proceeded to knock over all the items with the one kick. That group didn't win. In the Netherlands, there's a prison escape room where everyone is a prisoner and you have to escape prison. It's done in an actual ancient prison. There were about 300 participants and 85 actors, mostly prison guards and some prisoners. They have over 15 storylines which you can follow, and there are other inmates, actors, who'll lead these storylines and send you on quests. Coming back to the question though, at the beginning they warned everyone that no physical contact was allowed because during the first time, people would actually threaten each other to get money, and guards had been attacked. Also, they had to warn people that you weren't supposed to try climbing the 50-foot-high prison wall. I had a group come in. I noticed they'd been drinking a little but seemed mostly fine, so I let them into the room and started the clock. They were just wandering around. At the half-an-hour mark, they were laying on the floor and rolling around. They didn't do any harm to the room. I don't remember if they even solved one puzzle. When I let them out after an hour, they claimed they'd had fun, but they didn't really do anything. And did they remember it the next day? I don't know. Something tells the narrator that there was more than just alcohol going on here. Seems kind of risky to do anything harder than booze or more illegal in an escape room, but hey, if that's what floats your boat and you don't seem to actually be annoying the attendants, by all means, trip away. You're probably better than those other people who just trash the rooms. I don't work at one, but my co-worker went to one last year, and his story was hilarious. He's a really serious guy from Boston. He got talked into going to one with his wife and a few old friends that had come down for a vacation. He said as soon as they walked in, he saw a broom that looked completely out of place, so he grabbed it. He thought they'd need it at some point. They made it out of the first room. They got to the second room, and he's still got the broom. He swears it was just too out of place to not be a part of the puzzle at some point, and they make it through the second room. The third room, they get stuck. They're reading clues over and over, and he gets fixated on the broom while everyone else is searching the room. He was looking it over, up and down, checking the handle for markings. Mind you, he has terrible nearsighted vision, and checking the bristles. Time was running out, and he was arguing with his wife at this point that the broom was the final clue. Time runs up, they walk out, and the crew is just dying laughing. Someone left the broom by mistake. Nothing more, nothing less. He carried the damn broom through 3 rooms. He got a good laugh about it later, but he was embarrassed at the time. It was a great story he told the next morning at work. Oh God, so many stories. I worked for various escape rooms for a few years. You'd be amazed at the amount of players who want to bring their own tools into the game. Screwdrivers, lockpicks, stuff like that. You have to nail down everything too, or players will absolutely destroy it. The drunker they are when they start, the worse the damage is. We once had a player literally try to tear off the drywall because they thought there had to be something behind it. In one of our rooms, we had this big heavy-duty picture frame screwed into a wall with 4-inch nails, and they still managed to pry it off. We've had doors taken off hinges, kids trying to crawl inside the vents, the list goes on. I don't know if it counts as absurd, but one of the most unique experiences I've had, there was a wedding proposal. The guy worked it out with us ahead of time. We put the ring and a note he wrote professing his love behind some bars in the last puzzle you unlock before getting out of the room. His girlfriend actually ended up fitting her hands between the bars and got the note way early, but the guy was still running around trying to solve stuff because he didn't notice she had it, and she was sitting there reading it, starting to bawl. She said yes, by the way. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. At an escape room near me, they had a group of lads on a stag do. These guys got very drunk, and during the escape room they thought they could escape via the sewers. They managed to rip out the manhole cover which was bolted down into the concrete. This cover is now permanently broken as it's too expensive to fix, they said, advised us not to escape via the sewers. I interviewed for a job at an escape room. They told me that one of their standard instructions you must tell every group is to not stick things in electrical outlets because too many people did it. What's messed up is that I went to an escape room in LA where one of the puzzles was to literally stick a fork in a socket. Everyone told me I was insane when I suggested it, but 2 of the prongs were folded back and there was fake soot around the fake outlet. I did it and the boom gave us the next clue. I thought it was super stupid though. Why risk people learning that behavior and trying it elsewhere? I've heard of multiple escape rooms where one of the solutions is to do something like this that would be really dangerous under normal conditions. I can't even begin to fathom the stupidity involved in teaching your customers to potentially unalive themselves in order to win the game. One guy peed on the wall thinking that the plaster was snow. A group came in that disassembled some of the furniture, a bed and a desk, then ripped some wallpaper off the walls and pulled the heads off some of the stuffed animals. We had a room called the Prison Break. The players were starting in a cell, and to make it realistic, there was a toilet in there. Gladly, people didn't try to take a whiz or number 2 in it, but they also refused to touch it, although we were given a hint that there was a hidden key by the toilet. Later in the game, they had to search for a specific case file for a murderer, but they just searched for their own file as if we'd put a file for every new player in there. A lot of people lost their game on that spot as it was the last quest to do. I've done a lot of escape rooms and chatted with all the staff. These are the dumbest people I've been told about. The first is one of the rooms that's based on Jumanji and has a waterfall with real water in it. Enough people have tried to drink the water that they had to tell people not to in their opening spiel. Another one has a bunch of museum-style display cases with glass covering the top with different puzzles inside. One of them has sand in it and small holes in the top. Someone tried to tip the display case over and get the sand out so they could read the hidden message. When the game master told them to stop doing that, she stopped momentarily and then tried again 2 minutes later. The game master told her if she did it again, she'd be kicked out, and the woman said, "Just making sure you're paying attention." And people constantly try to pull up floorboards or tear down wallpaper in the horror-themed rooms, even after they've been told there's nothing hidden there and warned not to do it or they'll get charged for the damage. I feel kinda bad about the time our group unscrewed half the pictures on the wall using a paperclip, since none of us had the sense to think that maybe the pictures being screwed down was a sign we weren't supposed to look behind them. To elaborate, we managed to crack the combination lock to a drawer which had a jar of paperclips in it, to which our reaction was, "Do we have to pick a lock?" And then later thinking, "Hey, I think these fit perfectly into the screws on the walls." Turns out the actual purpose of the paperclips was to make a chain to dangle into a tube to pick up a key. I can't remember if we had a magnet or hook to help with that. We found the tube with the key in it behind one of the pictures in the room that wasn't screwed down, and found the code to the combination lock on the drawer below the first one. Whoops! Escape room enthusiast here. We spent far more time than I care to admit trying to figure out what the heck the numbers written in Sharpie on the underside of a rug in the middle of the room meant. Turns out they were an inventory number from the thrift store the designer brought the thing from, and nobody else had ever noticed them before. We still won, but wasted a lot of our time. The second time I went to one, the owner told me that once a group decided to smash all the locks because they found a hammer on which a clue was written. They had to replace all the locks and it's now a toy hammer. I'd like to say those people were morons, but when we found it, the same idea was discussed in our group. Yeah, I mean, honestly, as much as some of the people in these other stories seem very dumb indeed now, even a smart group might think that they're overthinking things when the intended solution is actually something as simple as break locks with smashy thing. It's a shame that they had to tone down the authenticity by replacing a real hammer with a plastic fantastic, though. Not absurd, but funny. I was at a heist-themed escape room over Christmas, which featured a bit where you have to maneuver past lasers and get a diamond. If you tripped the laser, the display case would close and you needed to go back to the start of the room to reset everything. After we finished the room, we were told about a group of 4 elderly women who just walked through the lasers and had one of the group stay at the beginning, resetting the trip. Absolute geniuses. I can just imagine it, the cackling as they broke the system. So I'm usually not cruel with my escapees. If I see them looking at the serial number for a prop, I usually send them a message saying they have a good eye, but it won't be relevant to the room. The biggest thing that happens is couples doing the room and fracturing under the slightest bit of pressure. I've legit had people break up in the room because they couldn't handle working through stress together. One time a couple said they were done and kept doing the room, which was extremely awkward for me, who was the poor sap who had to watch them for an hour. Most of the time, people are just plain stupid, which can be fun and frustrating depending on how people react to realizing it. It's very annoying when the people are cocky beforehand and then don't manage anything without a hint and somehow blame us for messing up. There have also been instances of people throwing up or trying to use the prop toilet inside one of the prison cells, but I think my favorite absurd thing was the one proposal I had while working at an escape room. You might think, well, isn't that romantic? And I thought so too, until I found out the escape rooms aren't just something that they both love, which made the proposal unique. It was their first room ever. They'd never played an escape game before in their lives. Weird choice of scenery to propose. Even weirder when you consider that they took 2 friends with them. But it doesn't end there. They barely managed to get out, and the ring was hidden in the very last queue, so if they hadn't managed, stuff would have become very awkward. It became that anyway because when he proposed, neither of their friends really reacted to it. They just stood there blankly, which was made even worse by the fact that the guy was supposed to film the whole thing, which he didn't. And the other girl didn't even know he was proposing, so the surprise at least should have coerced a smile out of her. Nothing. The proposal speech was also delivered with as much passion as a paper bag, and as it turned out, the guy just told everyone at the reception that he didn't really want to marry her. At least not for the time being, but she'd got pregnant, so now he was kind of pushed into it. She said yes, but holy crap, all of us watching were hoping she wouldn't. Now, imagine proposing, or even worse being proposed to in an escape room, knowing you're being watched and listened to through cameras. What an absurd choice to make. I was a player, and I was in a large cage. Through the bars, I had to open a heavy lock. The cage was dimly lit with LED bars on the floor. I got the lock open, but due to it being heavy and me having to handle it through the bars, I dropped it on the LED bar. At first, I thought the light turning off was part of the room. Turns out I broke the LED bar. One of them believed the clue was inside them. And not in the whole Disney kind of it was inside you all along way. They thought there was a physical clue stashed inside that person somehow. My dad owns an escape room in a small town in Norway, and the weirdest thing someone has done is probably trying to punch the camera. The guy was like 150 centimeters tall and couldn't reach it. After trying 3 times to punch it, he gave up. Not a worker, but I was with a group of people and one of them became so overwhelmed that almost immediately after walking in, they spun around and walked right back out again. I was the player in this story. There was a horror-themed escape house with people in costumes screaming at you from time to time with chainsaws and stuff. We were in a room with an open jail cage and we knew the next clue was in that cage. But it's pretty obvious that cage was designed to scare the crap out of whoever was inside. I waltzed in, the cage door slammed shut behind me, I took the note and slipped myself out between the bars. We waited for several minutes until I slipped back into the cage so the game could progress. Later on, the workers told us they were really surprised when I'd slipped out of their trap and were trying to figure out what to do next.
There's been a few. The idiots initially tried cutting through their chains. They finally worked it out, and one of them sawed through their leg and shot the other one with a revolver we'd left in there.
Damn, that's wild. They should make a movie about that. It was my first 10-year-old brother's birthday party, and children are dumb as frick. It was themed around a nuclear power station that was going to blow up the town, and essentially what happened was we had an hour to complete 3 rooms. We took 45 minutes to get through the first because kids kept throwing stuff around. One guy got freaked out thinking it was real and pressed the button to end the room. Thankfully it didn't work or something and my dad shouted at him, so he threw a tantrum and literally locked himself inside a chest of drawers. Then, because kids can't organize crap, we had a hunt for the 3 most stressful minutes of my life for the key. Then we got through and it was sort of okay from there because a lot of the kids just gave up and left the room. Never again. Never, ever again. What's a scary science fact that the public knows nothing about? Scientific literature's conclusion on Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases in general is that the diseases start decades before the first obvious symptoms and that we need to treat them at this stage. When you exhibit obvious symptoms, it's too late and your brain is already mush. If you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 65, you've had the disease since your early 40s at least, and you experienced very mild symptoms but didn't notice it. And your brain fought like hell to compensate for the deficit. When you get diagnosed, your brain is already severely damaged and will never recover from the deficit. There's a gravitational anomaly in space called the Great Attractor, which is pulling everything within the Virgo and Hydra Centaurus superclusters towards it. It lies 150 to 250 million light-years from the Milky Way, which itself is being pulled towards it too. The scary part is that relative to us, this anomaly lies within the same plane as our own galaxy, making it very difficult to observe. Essentially, we have almost no concrete idea of what it is. On the flip side of the Great Attractor is the Boötes Void, which I find a bit creepy. The Boötes Void, sometimes called the Great Void, is a huge spherical region of space that contains very few galaxies. It's approximately 700 million light-years from Earth, and located near the constellation Boötes, which is how it got its name. The supervoid measures 250 million light-years in diameter, representing approximately 0.27% of the diameter of the observable universe, which itself is a daunting 93 billion light-years across. Its volume is estimated at 236,000 megaparsecs cubed, making it the largest known void in the universe. At first, astronomers were only able to find 8 galaxies across the expanse, but further observations revealed a total of 60 galaxies. Now, while that might still seem like a lot, it would be like stumbling upon only 60 objects across a region larger than the continental United States, and that's just in 2 dimensions. According to the astronomer Greg Aldering, the scale of the void is such that if the Milky Way had been in the center of the Boötes Void, we wouldn't have known that there were other galaxies until the 1960s. Looking at the volume of the Boötes Void, it should contain about 10,000 galaxies, when considering that the average distance between galaxies elsewhere in the universe is a few million light-years. But the question is, why and how this void came to be? There hasn't been enough time since the universe began for mere gravitational forces to clear out a space of that size. There's a theory which suggests that supervoids are caused by the intermingling of smaller mini-voids, like soap bubbles coming together. But a more, maybe creepier explanation is that the Boötes Void could be the result of an expanding Kardashev 3 scale civilization. As the colonization bubble expands outwards from its home system, the civilization dims each star and subsequently each galaxy it encounters by blanketing it in a Dyson shell. This might also explain why the void has such a nice spherical shape. Oh, and we're seeing a snapshot of the void 700 million years ago. A lot could have happened in the 700 million years that we just can't see or know of due to the inherent speed of light. Sweet dreams, everyone. Okay, so either there's a mega space empire just consuming suns for energy, and it could have done anything in the 700 million years since then, or that place is a barren nothingness for some other reason. I'm filing this right in my I don't want to think about it cabinet, thank you very much. If your dog swims in a lake after receiving a spot-on flea treatment, it absolutely decimates the invertebrate population. A large dog swimming in 8 Olympic swimming pools worth of water soon after treatment will leach enough neurotoxin to kill 50% of the lake's invertebrate population within 48 hours. There's some awareness of this, but it's not being taken seriously enough. I need to add, when I say after, I mean relatively soon after, within, say, a day, to have an effect quite this devastating. The leaching does reduce over the months, but it's still there, and the effect of multiple dogs still allows for a terrible buildup of chemicals. In 1958, a 7,600-pound nuclear bomb was lost off the Georgia coast near Savannah. It's never been found. Cancer geneticist here. Most cases of cancer that are sequenced generally just denote the prognosis or how long a patient has to live rather than treatment options. People always say, let's cure cancer, however this simplifies cancer as though it's only one disease. It's far more complicated than that. I studied at one of the largest cancer hospitals in the world where the motto is to make cancer history, but the only obtainable goal is to make it chronic. We study and research as much as possible, but every cancer requires different research, and unfortunately the powers that be often prohibit funding and proficient research. It's work I'm passionate about, but also a broken system that's infuriating to work in. Most of the faults that are capable of causing large earthquakes have never actually been mapped. Of course, we have a very good idea of locations and gross geometry of most major plate boundaries, but each one is very complicated in detail. We can only see visible faults, those which outcrop at the surface or are well known from seismic data. There are many, many more that are completely buried, obscured by overlying faults or other complex geology. The public believes that we've acquired 3D seismic data over most of the planet, but that's only true in hydrocarbon-bearing basins. We're incredibly ignorant of the detailed structure of the Earth. I can recall a number of times reading a headline that says something like, "Major earthquake occurs on previously unknown fault." And if we understand so little about plate boundaries, what about intraplate areas? Some of the largest earthquakes on Earth occur far from plate boundaries and we know very little about them. Take the New Madrid fault system, for example. Certainly we know where it is, but we have very little understanding of its detailed geometry and kinematics, or how the rocks move. Without that, it's almost impossible to predict anything. Sleep tight, folks! The entire explosive output from Little Boy, which is the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, came from just over half a gram of matter being converted into energy. The mass of a butterfly exploding with the force of 15,000 tons of TNT. Anthrax can sporulate in dirt and stay viable for hundreds of years until the soil is disturbed and the spores are inhaled. Oh, I've got a triple whammy for you. First, rabies. Once symptomatic, rabies has a 100% fatality rate. The only options are the rabies vaccine and immunoglobulin therapy, which, again, must be administered before any symptoms. Second, gamma ray bursts, henceforth referred to as GRBs. GRBs are a rare phenomenon emitted from the poles of rapidly spinning supernovae and hypernovae. In the event of a direct hit from a suitably close, which is really far, source, all life on Earth would be wiped out. The facing side would be annihilated instantly, while the trailing side would quickly die due to conditions on Earth no longer being suitable to support life, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And third, runaway global warming. There are many stores of greenhouse gases, namely carbon dioxide and methane, all over the place, but the conditions required to keep these gases trapped are delicate. And the worst part? It may already be too late to stop, even if humanity immediately ceased all greenhouse gas emissions and put every single resource we have into carbon sequestration. In the UK, about 17% of people have fetal alcohol syndrome. As much as 17% of us are developmentally disabled simply because prior to the late 90s, a large proportion of British mothers drank during pregnancy. 41% if surveys are to be believed. Thankfully, the prevalence rate has been falling fast since the late 90s when all of this research was published, but it's terrifying to see how much of an effect FASD is having on society. Small asteroids are hard to detect, but can still cause massive damage to towns. Hearing is supposedly one of the last senses to fade upon death based on EEG, or brainwave recordings. Oh, damn it! So you're telling me when I lean in next to the ear of my enemies and whisper, "I'll see you in hell," they might in fact actually be waiting for me? I was not prepared to have to face up to my own words. That's so awkward. So, how do I put this delicately? Insects are going extinct. We've lost a significant chunk just since the 80s. I think it was about 20%. Mozzies are going up, of course, but just about everything else is going down. It wasn't until I read this that I realized as a kid in the 90s I used to see butterflies all the time. Dragonflies too. My house used to get invaded by Christmas beetles every year. Not so much anymore. These days I might only see 1 or 2 Christmas beetles in December, if any at all. When I was a kid, I remember finding 8 in my house in a single night, same house. The Cascadia subduction zone runs off the coast of northern California to southern Canada and ruptures about every 250 to 350 years. We know this from the geologic records. The last rupture was January 1700, and there are written records from Japan of a tsunami that resulted from the earthquake on the other side of the Pacific. This zone is still active and is likely to rupture in the next 100 years, resulting in a magnitude 9 or higher earthquake that impacts the west coast from northern Cali to southern Canada. Prions. Misfolded proteins that cause a cascade of protein misfoldings that lead to amyloid plaque buildups, resulting in uncontrollable neurodegeneration that's fatal in 100% of cases within 2 years. There's no cure. We don't understand what causes it, we don't understand the mechanism of the misfolding cascade. We don't even fully understand the structure of the misfolded proteins. It could happen in theory to anyone at any time, and there's no way to tell until you start showing symptoms, at which point you might have 18 months to live, if you're lucky, the last 6 of which will be intensely unpleasant. Some forms of anesthesia don't actually numb you to the pain, they make you forget that you felt it. That reminds me that early anesthetic for children didn't stop pain, it just paralyzed the kids. The doctors just didn't believe the kids describing the pain, and it wasn't until a child of a doctor was able to recount in detail the medical procedure and how he was cut up and what caused the pain that they stopped using it. This is all from memory from a college neuroscience class, so I don't recall the specifics. If you live long enough, your chances of getting dementia are 100%. My biochem professor used to remind us that no matter how healthy you are, you will die of cancer or you will die of dementia. At a certain point, your body just begins to shut down. I don't know if I'd call it science per se, or myself a scientist, but I am a former funeral director, and one of the first things you learn in your actual funeral sciences class is that people over a certain body fat percentage will start a literal grease fire in your crematory oven if you don't bake them at the proper temperature and duration. Cold start, low and slow is the key. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There were once sea scorpions the size of a great white shark. You wouldn't melt like Gollum if you fell in lava, you'd lie on top of it, burning and evaporating. You'd die fast though, so that's cool. Everyone knows about scurvy, but the reason it's so terrifying is usually less well known. You see, scar tissue is not permanent. The process to build and maintain scar tissue is constantly ongoing. When you become vitamin C deficient, your scar tissue starts being reabsorbed by your body, opening up any and all old wounds. If you've ever had surgery, those internal incisions will open back up. Fortunately, it doesn't take a lot of vitamin C and it's abundant in our food sources, but it's still a little creepy that you could just start falling apart without it. On the flip side, too much vitamin C can lead to stomach cancer. Vitamin C is basically citric acid, and eating a ton of acid regularly is bad. We don't fully know how general anesthesia works. I knew that general anesthesia caused sleeping issues, but the reason why is weird. I attended an animal behavior conference a few years ago that included a lady talking about general anesthetic and bees. The bees had complex time structures and would normally do certain things at certain times of the day. Those given anesthesia had their body clocks shifted by the time that they were under. Like that period just didn't exist for them. Their whole body clock was paused, completely different to if they'd been sleeping. Apparently, the same is true for humans. Here's a few scary medical facts regarding CPR that you won't often hear in your first aid or CPR class put on in school. I only learned this stuff after schooling to become an EMT. What's the success rate of CPR? The average person assumes it's 75% or greater. In reality, it's barely 10%. It's one of the first things they told us in training because all new people have way too high of an expectation of the effectiveness of CPR. It can be very depressing when you're doing everything you were trained to and aren't getting the results you think you should be getting. The time from collapse to administration of a shock via AED is absolutely paramount. They say the chances of survival drop 10% per minute. Oh, and rescue breaths. If you're not being very, and I mean very careful, you'll cause gastric dissension. You'll literally be blowing up their stomach and they will vomit. Then there are the cracks and crackles. If done right, it'll sound and feel like you're breaking every rib in little old lady Nelson's chest. You're likely not, it's cartilage and other bits shifting. Although if you're a bit too vigorous, you may very well break a rib or two, but hey, they're already dead, so it doesn't matter. They'd rather be alive with a broken rib than dead. Maybe it's just the sort of movies I watch, but I was under no illusions about the effectiveness of CPR. Most of the action flicks I see have someone administering it, not working, and then them bringing their fist down with a vigorous bout of swearing at the end. But it's normally not anyone important who's died in the film, so silver lining. Soil science adjacent researcher here. We're degrading, polluting, and losing our topsoil at such a rate that we may not be able to produce enough food to feed everyone within 50 or 60 years, let alone what impacts climate change might bring to bear on our food supply. And the US government's crop insurance programs and incentives all reinforce the bad practices, while discouraging regenerative practices. These bad policies are extremely hard to change because of lobbying from the major agribusiness companies who make money off these short-sighted policies. Our food supply is further threatened by our agricultural overdependence on aquifer water, which is not being replenished, making it an unsustainable source of water. If the aquifers are overdrawn, depleted, or polluted, we hit a hard wall of water scarcity and will have no backups to address the problem with. The drawdown of the aquifers also causes land subsidence, which causes costly infrastructure and building damage. The general public doesn't realize the impending crisis that will be caused by the confluence of these factors. We keep our dangerous bacteria species in a college campus's fridge, protected by one single lock with one power cord. You know, despite what advertising tells you, it's really hard to claim something is scientifically proven. Why? Proving causality is complicated and expensive. Better yet, if you ever hear the word proven, there's a 100% chance that academia and science were not involved. There is a forest of trees that are all genetically identical and connected at the roots, and is considered the largest organism on Earth. I'm pretty sure it was the inspiration behind Ewa in Avatar. If you live in the Netherlands and your house is older than, say, 100 years, and you haven't renovated your plumbing, chances are fairly high that you can get lead poisoning. It's impossible for water treatment companies to pinpoint where they are and how many, and many building plans don't include the plumbing schematics, so check your pipes for lead. They do harm, especially to children. Phosgene gas is a gas whose lethal dose is 5 times the detection threshold, which is when you can smell it. And it smells like freshly cut grass, supposedly. This is super important if you're a welder or amateur welder. Don't use brake cleaner on rusted metal if you intend to weld it. Welders use electrical currents to create arcs which superheat metal. If there's brake cleaner or residue on the metal, it'll create enough phosgene gas to kill you instantly. Wire wheels exist for a reason. Use them. Most cosmetic items that say they contain ingredients like different plant extracts have just enough to say it's in there but not enough to actually help you. Like a few grams in a batch that's a couple of thousand gallons. If it isn't an FDA-regulated component, like for example salicylic acid in a shampoo for people with dandruff, there's literally nothing stopping companies from putting virtually undetectable amounts of the ingredients into stuff just to be able to say it's there. Grass-fed beef is the same sort of scam. The USDA only requires a cow to have eaten grass a single time in its entire life to earn the label. Nearly everything we can measure on Earth is contaminated with particles of microplastic. Topsoil loss is pretty scary for the medium to long term. We're burning through soil in the Midwest much faster than other parts of the US. Interestingly enough, a lot of the damage from the Dust Bowl is still in place, but we're relying on more input-intensive methods to eke out results. Fertilizer runoff is also causing a giant anoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The nutrients feed algae, which has a population explosion and rots en masse. Some are holding out for usable soil opening up at high latitudes, like in Canada or Siberia with climate change, but at least near-term, that doesn't seem too promising, given that it will be generally poorer soil with less phosphate, and melting permafrost won't be too reliable for quite a while. While vertical farming and the like is making advances, as I understand it, most of what's practical to grow tends to be inefficient calorie-wise. Antibiotics have been overused and misused for so long that various bacteria strains have started to get resistant to them. What used to be a treatable infection might soon become deadly because we're unable to treat it with the antibiotics we have today. There's research to try and find other ways to treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but until then, please use prescribed antibiotics until they're finished, not until you feel better. If unused, don't flush them down the toilet or put them in the bin. Give them to a pharmacy so they can discard them correctly, and use antibiotics when necessary, because some countries will give them willy-nilly while others are more conservative. Man, we really can't win, can we? Here I thought we'd effectively developed a process for neutering certain formerly dangerous conditions, when really we're just forcing them to go away for a while, unionize, and come back as something bigger and more deadly. There's a solar event known as CME, or coronal mass ejection. It occurs very frequently on a cosmic timescale. Every few decades to centuries, there's a decent-sized one. Why are they so scary? A CME is a massive burst of radiation, easily able to fully envelop the Earth in its path, and it's the equivalent of a non-stop EMP barrage. The last time a big one hit Earth was when we had telegraph lines for communications and they spontaneously caught fire. In today's world, with everything running on electricity, when the next big one hits, we'll have at most a few days' warning, and it'd be a literal apocalypse movie scenario, with planes going down due to their whole electrical systems frying, nobody's vehicles starting, untold billions in fire damage wreaking havoc everywhere, and the machines we depend on to help would be similarly fried. Some stuff would be unaffected, being parked in deep concrete-roofed parking garages, and the like, but our entire infrastructure would be useless for years. It would literally send us into a mini dark age while people tried to get things working again. Recovery would take decades to centuries. If you look up and see an asteroid in the sky about to hit the Earth, you have about 1 second to react. The coronavirus was not surprising nor unexpected by people working in public health, and it's not the worst-case scenario by any means. Ironically, the success of public health has been so dramatic over the past 150 years that politicians and the general public forget how important it is, and how much authority government officials have in a public health crisis. Humans rely on evaporating sweat to stay cool. If humidity gets too high, relatively low heat can kill humans. The equivalent of 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius at 100% relative humidity can kill even healthy humans. This is called a wet bulb effect. By 2050, scientists predict multiple wet bulb events in the North China Plain. Approximately 400 million people live in the North China Plain. Helium. Fun for party balloons. Everyone likes a squeaky voice, except helium is a vital component of various high-tech devices, such as MRIs. Helium is also light enough that the Earth's gravity can't contain it. And we are running out. Not today, not tomorrow, but we are frivolously wasting it when we should be jealously hoarding it, and eventually we won't have any left, and a lot of our wonderful technology will suddenly stop working. The only thing stopping genetic manipulation on humans is legislation. The human genome is riddled with mutations. Some were passed down from your parents, some occur during DNA replication, and others as a result of DNA damage from the environment, like smoking, UV lights, stuff like that. Most of them are harmless. Some will be repaired, and some won't. But others will be cancer suppressor genes or oncogenes. In fact, you may have cancerous cells growing in your body right now. During World War II, when America was working on the first nuclear bombs, they hadn't finalized the maths on whether or not a nuclear explosion would cause an ongoing reaction with the atmosphere, thereby igniting it and eradicating Earth. Another nuclear fact for you: the original nuclear bombs leveled the cities they detonated over, yet are considered puny by today's standards. The most powerful bomb ever created, the Tsar bomber, had an explosive yield 3,000 times more powerful than the original nuclear bombs, and its power was calculated to be more than 10 times the combined power of every single munition used in World War II. That includes every bullet fired, every grenade thrown, every artillery shell fired, every bomb dropped, and of course, the 2 nuclear bombs dropped as well. It was detonated 4 kilometers from the ground over the remote Sverny Islands, yet still completely destroyed towns within a couple of 100 kilometers of the blast and broke windows as far away as Copenhagen, Denmark. The shockwave from the blast circled the globe 9 times. The plane that dropped it was given a 50-50 chance of survival. Yet the bomb was originally designed to be twice as powerful. 94% of the universe is completely out of our reach forever. An electric current of only 20 megaamps is enough to stop your heart and kill you. Under the right conditions, even a 9-volt battery can be lethal. Botox is made from botulinum toxin. This toxin is produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum and is considered to be one of the most poisonous, lethal substances known to mankind. The toxin is a neurotoxin that blocks nerve signals to muscles. Consequently, it prevents muscles injected with Botox from contracting or tensing, so they become weak or paralyzed, thus improving the appearance of wrinkles and fine lines. Fortunately, though, Botox is only injected in small, targeted doses and is considered extremely safe as long as it's made and provided by a licensed professional. What's the craziest thing an undercover cop had to do to not blow their cover? My friend who was an undercover cop said that multiple times he had to let himself be arrested to not blow it. Like when a sting was going down or whatever, instead of being like, "Hey, I'm a cop," he'd be arrested along with everyone else. Former jailer from a large metro department here, we'd be notified that someone was undercover coming in from a raid, but other than that, they were to be treated just the same as any other arrest. We'd keep an eye on them on camera to ensure safety by watching for potential scraps and stuff. We'd do the same for any number of scenarios and people. Our goal was generally to spot and stop fights before they became physical anyways. But we were usually told ahead of time when an undercover came in so that nobody went, "Hey Smith, how did he get arrested, man? Crap, your sergeant's gonna be mad." That kind of thing. My cousin was an undercover ATF agent. Anyway, they were trying to bust some guys for illegal alcohol distribution and were building a rapport by going undercover. My cousin doesn't take his ATF badge with him when he's undercover because if anyone saw it, he'd be done for. Anyway, some hot-headed black and white cops came over and started getting in their faces. My cousin couldn't blow his cover, but pretty soon the police started getting physical and they beat the crap out of my cousin and the guys he was trying to get evidence from. They take them all into the police station only to find out that my cousin is in fact ATF. He was livid because cops aren't supposed to beat people up generally. He's currently filing a lawsuit against that police department. I worked as a transcriptionist for a while, and I transcribed some tape taken off the body mics of undercover officers working for a very notorious domestic terror case. It was crazy. They'd sound like an absolute backwards hillbilly lunatic while talking to their marks, and then later when talking to other police officers, they'd sound all businesslike and very professional. My friend used to be a state trooper. She told me about how she'd used to have to go undercover as a working girl to try and catch Johns. She didn't do so well, though. She was far too polite, so they all knew something was up. My dad was police for more than 30 years. One year we were driving by a street corner and he goes, "I thought they were cleaning up this area. That was a working girl." It never crossed my mind. I just never paid attention to that stuff, so I said, "How could you tell she was a working girl?" He pointed out her general look, which was ragged, and dress, as well as, of course, working the corner. Then he added, "That's pretty much what real working girls look like. If they've got 2 arms, 2 legs, and all their teeth, they're probably an undercover cop." Honestly, this is one of those things that the narrator would never have suspected that people would go undercover as. There you have it, folks. Be careful who you solicit. Oh, wait, probably don't solicit people. Unless it's legal in your country, maybe just don't do it. When I first got started in forensics, it was when chat rooms and webcams were taking off. So, pervs thought they'd be able to figure out who was on the internet, since clearly you'll know you're webcamming from a 40-year-old dude munching on donuts instead of a high schooler. I was a naive 18-year-old woman who was just getting started in policing, doing some clerical work for my hometown police department, when I heard a couple of people talking about how they were having a hard time chatting up creeps now that webcams were a thing. I told them, why not just hire someone to act like an underage person and coach them on what to say and how to set up meetings to catch these buttholes. And lo and behold, I'd volunteered myself for the job. We set up a bedroom in one of the upstairs offices, complete with a bed, a desk, and some posters from one of the officer's teenage daughters. I had to wear some of my high school sports clothes or pajamas while talking to these awful people via webcam. I passed notes back and forth with a team of officers and passed it off as trying to do homework while chatting. The hardest part was to still seem interested and innocent while this guy on the screen was telling me what kind of horrible things he wants to do to me under the presumptions he's making. We netted somewhere around 120 men and a handful of women. The most notable was a few clergy, 2 city councilmen, a state trooper, school teachers, and other people you'd just trust around kids. All of them looked like regular people and seemed like people I'd interact with every day without any idea of what they were doing at night in front of their computer. Was there anyone that got away? Yeah, a few of them never showed up, but there was only one that got away that I just know went after a real victim or had already done so already. That really made me worried. He would try and chat off and on when I was on, and he got a thrill off of telling me how he'd like to tie me up and do all sorts of obscene things in great detail. I actually started crying and he just laughed and said it would be fine after I got used to it. I don't regret doing this work, but it was quite the mind frick, especially at 18 years old. Regarding entrapment, we got around it because it didn't actually apply with the way we were doing things. I never actually went into chat rooms and solicited people via text or webcam. I didn't have to solicit anyone. They were literally just waiting in the chat rooms ready to pounce. What usually happened was I would log in with a girly or teenagery handle, and people would start sending private chat requests before I could even post hello on the chat feed. We often had so many that sometimes we had to let a few of them go because there were just too many for me to try and talk to or type with. So we never actually tried to get them to talk to me. Oftentimes we couldn't get them to shut up. Once they got going, they had no inhibitions at all. If you go look up a teen chat, make up a cute handle and just post saying hi, you will get swarmed with weirdos trying to chat you up or get you to cam with them. I don't recommend doing it because it will destroy any faith you have left in humanity. As a former correctional officer, we had a situation where a major police department planted a cop in prison to get information on a guy they believed was orchestrating hits from inside the prison. The warden knew, and I knew by accident, but not a single other correctional officer knew, nor did any of the staff, including medical, and that's the way they wanted it. He went through receiving, he was categorized and placed, it was wild. He was there for a week, got the info they needed, and got him out. It didn't become public knowledge that he was undercover until after I'd left, and it was a long while after as they were making a case. It was a surreal moment. My father worked for NCIS. He told me about an incident where his guys set up a sting to bust some substance suppliers who turned out to be local police setting up their own sting. They figured it out when they tried to bust each other. I know a guy who went undercover as a junkie. He was committed. He'd stop showering for a while before a gig and pee on his tracksuit before going into work. He was so good that he managed to get the same dealer convicted twice in the space of a year, and they never suspected he was the rat. He had multiple police records under different names as well. One time, a Homeland Security officer came up to my house undercover, flashed his badge and asked if he could come in. Once he was in, he pulled out a piece of paper with my neighbor's face on it. He asked if I'd seen him around lately. When I asked what he did and let him know I haven't seen him around, he told me what he was wanted for. It would be shorter to list the really dark crimes he wasn't wanted for. Seriously, it was worse than you could imagine. Turns out he did all manner of unspeakable things to his own family, and once he found out he was wanted, he went back to El Salvador. I thought they only flashed their badges in the movies, but turns out that crap is real. So this guy appears out of nowhere and befriends a relative of mine who was involved in illegal stuff. The guy was very friendly and just down to party. He had money, he paid for product, everything. He'd drop in on parties and even allegedly hooked up with a few of the working girls. Then he placed an order much larger than before. A few weeks later, a relative of mine is arrested and is currently in prison. So, the craziest thing an undercover cop had to do to keep their cover? Buy substances and go to brothels. A guy my mum dated for a long time was an undercover cop. Older guy in his 70s, he was fresh out of the academy and at the Asbury Park riots. Sad, scary stuff. And then was an undercover narcotics cop for 14 years during the 70s and 80s with the NJSP. He was Puerto Rican and spoke Spanish, an ex-Marine, and became a state trooper. They utilized his ability to blend in with organized crime in the Latin community. He had to do lines in front of a bunch of guys during a buy one night and basically stuck his knife in and blew a mound up his nose. Then he started having a minor paranoia or panic attack that they were going to find out he was a cop thanks to the gram of stuff he just took to the dome. He was breathing heavy and went out for air, his heart was pounding out of his chest, he was panicking over how to get out of it. One of the gangsters came outside to talk to him, he was ready to run or fight, and the guy goes, "Man, I've never seen someone snort so much at once, man. You're alright?" He sighs a huge sigh of relief and was like, "Yep, I never did that much. I'm having trouble breathing." The guy was real nice, brought him a drink, and they smoked together. Everyone was joking that he had a heart of a lion to take that much. He actually felt bad about locking that one guy up when it all went down. I think he said he tried to help him out or get a reduced sentence or something, and he has other stories. A guy that worked with me was going to this biker bar frequently to get in the gang. It was substance-related. He didn't want to get hammered and do something stupid, so he'd take his beers into the bathroom with him, dump out half, and fill them with water. Drinking watered-down beer is the real crime here. That stuff is gross. Nice try, crime lord. I imagine there are numerous substance dealers and cartel leaders anxiously waiting for responses to this question. Just waiting. Hey! If you're a criminal, and you're watching this video, look away. This isn't for you. Go watch a video about how to be caught peacefully and minimize collateral damage or something. I remember a few years ago in Seattle, people were complaining because cops took months to do an undercover investigation at an exotic dance club to determine if the women were working girls. Apparently, this investigation entailed going to these clubs a lot, drinking beer and trying to get the women there to do things for money other than dance. They proudly announced several of the women were working girls and the club was shut down. I found an article about the club being busted. The dancers were cited for 18 counts of illegal touching during lap dances, 16 counts of off-stage undress, which is prohibited, 18 counts of accepting money for illegal acts, and 4 counts of, being a working girl. All of these are misdemeanors. The manager was cited for reckless managerial conduct, a misdemeanor, for allegedly being aware of illegal activity and taking no action. Meanwhile, violent crime was increasing, and 3rd and Pine was an open-air substance market. So yeah, these guys were clearly picking and choosing their jobs. They also did stings at a bikini barista stand by driving up to the window with a 20 sticking out of their fly. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad went undercover for several years and talked about a crystal head that he hung out with all the time and even babysat her kids while she went out to get strung out. This went on for several months while they were figuring out who the big dealer was and were acquiring warrants. He grew a beard, had a fake ID, drove an old crappy car. Eventually, they got warrants to bust a bunch of people in the ring, and he was actually a part of the SWAT team at the time and was part of the group that smashed in the doors and arrested her and a bunch of others in the area. He had to wear a balaclava to protect his identity when with the SWAT team. He said it was actually really difficult because he had become an important part of those kids' lives and was kind of attached to them, and now they had no mother and had to be taken to Child Protective Services. I never got to ask him more questions about this before he passed, but I have no idea how he balanced his crazy second life and then came home and acted like a normal husband and father to our family. My cousin, whose Secret Services, acted like a smack addict homeless beggar and a semi-crazy Muslim religious salesman owning a stall for surveillance purposes. I've gone undercover online to infiltrate the worst sort of illegal creeps and pervs in their dealings. Nothing too intense, but I had to interact with suspects online or over the phone who were frickin' sick in the head and acted like it wasn't the most vile stuff in the world. I had to play dead on Mount Everest once. My code name was Green Boots. I fell prey to an undercover operation. I feel obligated to preface this with how amazed I was at how integrated this guy was in our gang. If giving an Oscar-worthy performance is the standard, I'd have to say I'm pretty impressed by what you guys can do. Over the course of several months, this cop earned our trust. Heck, at one point I would have said that I trusted this man more than my own brother, who was also in the gang. To be fair though, I caught my brother stealing product from us more than once, but at least I trusted him to not directly destroy my livelihood. Suffice to say, this cop's acting skill was the #1 factor that led to us getting busted. The guy, let's call him Dave, was absolutely fearless and tough as nails. One of our initiation rituals involved letting members of our gang wail on you for 3 minutes with no holding back. If you were still breathing afterwards, you were in. After getting pummeled to the ground by 7 or 8 different men, Dave wasn't just alive. It was almost as if he enjoyed it. He was probably smiling because he got his foot in the door, now that I think of it. To get the craziest thing Dave did, I need to explain how our gang functioned. We start off being referred to as a number, both to protect identity and as a form of putting lower-ranked members in their place. Names had to be earned. We didn't exactly have a set criteria for earning a name, but members often had to bring in enough income for the gang, earn the leader's trust, and then commit various violent acts for the benefit of the group before a name was even considered. All names followed the same theme, astronomy. Our leader was known as Vega. The day Dave earned his name, Vega had him as a getaway driver for a group of members. Their job was to sneak into a rival dealer's house, steal his product, and then escape in Dave's car. As they were making their getaway, someone opened fire on the vehicle and Dave took a round to the forearm. Without even slowing down, he managed to get our guys back to the house using one arm to drive. After his arrival, Vega and I rushed him to the ER as he sat there, holding a jacket against the wound, trying to control his breathing. Within the next day, he had made a full recovery. Once Dave got back, everyone showered him with gratitude and praised his awesomeness. Vega approached him with a name tag in his hand and pinned it to Dave's shirt, signifying that he'd earned his right to be known as something more than a number. Sirius. I don't hold any grudges against him for putting us behind bars. That guy saved my life one time. Wherever you are, man, thank you. You changed who I was for the better in the end. I'll never forget the time you earned your Sirius tag, though. My cousin worked undercover in the biker community. He was really into working out and bodybuilding, so he managed to convince everyone that he treated his body like a temple and didn't drink, do substances, or eat like crap. That wasn't very far from the truth, so it wasn't too hard for him to play the part. He's also a former Marine sharpshooter, so he was tough as nails and pretty heavily tattooed, so he definitely gave off a "don't F with me" vibe. I did work for the liquor board in the city next to my town, busting bars for underage drinking. When I'd get served, I'd have to text the officer in charge and he'd come in and take my picture with the drink and then fine the bar, typically a few $100s, and the bar would get a strike. 3 strikes and they lost their liquor license. When I would get served, I wasn't allowed to drink any alcoholic beverages. Only once did I actually have to drink the drink served to me. I was at a sketchy biker bar and they're known for underage drinking and already had 2 strikes. They're also known for getting rough with the informants, like some employees and patrons attacking kids from 18 to 20. So I walked in and asked for a Budweiser, and I showed him my real ID and he serves me my beer. Before I could even pull out my phone, the bartender grabbed my wrist and asked me if I worked for the liquor board. I told him no, and he says, "Okay then, chug your beer." So I slam the bottle of Bud and he lets me go and then tells me, "I've got my eye on you, boy," and gets me another Bud. I then take a Snapchat of me at the bar with my drink and hightail it out of there. I then show the picture to the officer and tell everything that happened, and he heads to the bar and ends up fining them and the bartender and giving them their last strike. They ended up taking everything to court and I got called in as a witness. I had to testify in court everything that had happened. The bar lost the case, and when I was walking out to my car, the owner yelled to me, "Hey kid, watch yourself. You'll get what's coming to you." So far, nothing has happened to me. This happened about 3 years ago, so I don't think anything will happen to me. And I'm getting a lot of hate in the comments, people calling me scum and degenerate, so here's something that'll make you even more angry. I wasn't even getting paid to do it either. Well, on the one hand, you're clearly the definition of a narc, but you also absolutely have a massive set on you and you weren't doing it for your own benefit, so honestly, kind of respect. We do have these laws for a reason, so even though this seems kind of obnoxious, I think it was a net good. City cop here. We don't do too much long-term undercover, but our general orders have a policy covering the use of substances on duty in certain circumstances. While it doesn't specify that we can do substances, it states that if we consume them, we have to immediately respond to our department's health clinic for documentation and treatment. I must have been 15 when one day the doorbell rang and I opened the door to two guys looking very much like real tough street guys. They showed me their badges and asked for my mum or dad. Turned out they wanted to stake out a public playground behind our garden that was used by some dealers for their mules. Those are the people who drink very large amounts of water and chuck up little packages with some substances in them. There was a multi-story bank near the playground, but the bank didn't want anything to do with it. So they asked my parents whether they could set up a surveillance team on our terrace for a couple of days. My parents allowed it, and my mum prepared food for those guys all week long. I think cops at least do some blow. The easiest way to prove you're not a cop is to take some illegal substances. Then they just make sure the court date is far enough away that the officer has clean pee if he's accused of doing so. In college, I took a few criminal justice classes. Our professor, who I'll call Bob, was a cop for 15 or so years and had gone undercover in the 80s for a very long time. Bob was a biker as a hobby, and he was sent undercover to break up a substance ring in the biker community. Bob arranged to buy some crystal from some guy, and shortly after the buy, the dealer was arrested. The dealer's sister started telling everyone that she thought Bob was a cop, and some of the other bikers started asking him questions. So a day or so after the sister started accusing Bob of being a narc, the entire group was at a bar. Bob told a few of the guys to meet him outside in a few minutes, and Bob told the sister he had some crystal for her and to come outside. When they finally got out of there, Bob told her, "Where I'm from, friends don't call friends narcs." And then he beat the crap out of her in front of the entire group. He kicked her as hard as he could between her legs, which, while not as painful if you're a woman, still hurts. Then he said he punched her 4 or 5 times in the face, hard. He said he didn't want to do it, but after he did that, no one accused him of being a cop ever again. Oof. I was once the gardener for a cop who worked undercover to identify pimps and extract people who were being exploited against their will. She retired early due to mental health issues, likely stemming from substance use during her time undercover. To keep cover, she'd do substances that were being offered or used. Of course, things spiraled out of control for her, and suddenly she was on permanent paid leave and stayed in the house most days hiding from the world. So for her, what she did to keep cover is offer up her sanity in exchange for some successful arrests. I used to be the night manager of an adult toy shop. A drunk vice cop and his lady came in late at night, and the vice cop proceeded to brag about how he'd been part of the team that helped recently shut down a local exotic dance club. Every Friday, the chief would hand him and his partner each $1,000 in cash and send them to the club with instructions to do whatever they could to try and buy favors and smack. Apparently their first few trips were a dud, but after a while the one in the store was able to cajole one of the girls into giving him a down-under kiss. He splooged and then flashed the badge before she could even swallow. He then proceeded to demand to use our bathroom. I told him, no dice. Public restrooms and adult retail is a bad combination for everyone. He said he was a cop, and I told him that was completely irrelevant. He protested by peeing his pants in my store and telling me that I made him do it before storming out with his lady. In short, if you live in Butler County, Ohio, 2,000 of your tax dollars are spent weekly on table dances and favors for idiotic motherfrickin' brociopaths who aren't even housebroken. Way to serve and protect, butthead. What loophole did you exploit for years to go through life on easy mode? I used to live in an apartment across the road from a casino whilst at university. They released an app where if you checked in, you got points that went towards free food and drinks. Because I was close enough to the casino, I'd just check in without going to the casino itself. Every Saturday, I used to get a free burger, fries and drink and watch sports in the sports bar. They eventually scrapped the app. It was awesome, considering I was a broke uni student. In the late 80s, you could make a long-distance collect call from a payphone and charge it to a private number. The operator would call the other number to confirm. We'd ask the operator to call the number of another payphone nearby, and we'd have a friend authorize the call. Free long distance for almost a year. I used to work at a grocery store, and we had this era of the steak discounts. Hundreds of coupons for $5 off a steak were just everywhere for some reason. I found out that if I used the self-checkout and brought a steak that was less than $5 while using the coupon, the machine would give me back the difference in change. I ate dozens of free steaks and filled my change jar up quite nicely. At my current apartment complex, they just changed the laundry machines, so you needed to use this super crappy slow app. I found out that if you pressed start on the app and start on the machine, and then backed out of the app while it was chatting with the machine would start but wouldn't charge any money. I've been washing and drying for free for a few months. The app's name is similar to Small GS or Small Payments. Arby's used to have a take a survey on the back of the receipt and get a free roast beef sandwich. But when I got the free one, I got a receipt then too. I brought one sandwich and got literally dozens for free over the course of a year or so. I managed Burger King in high school, and they had a similar free sandwich with survey on receipt thing. That wasn't a loophole, it was intentional. Most people who had come in feeling smart for their free sandwich would grab a drink or other item. You'd be shocked at how much restaurants make on soda. The margins are like 500%. I was living near and attending our local university. While working full-time in an economy in the midst of a recession, I barely had enough money to pay the bills, let alone eat. Where I live is very well known for its tourist industry and casinos, so I had quite a few friends who worked in it and would tell me about their massive employee luncheon cafeterias. At that time, there were no ID cards or lanyards to be scanned or checked. All you needed to do was find it and be dressed appropriately to the employer's dress code. After my friend and I did a dry run on one of those trips, in order for me to find it without getting lost, I'd go it alone. For almost 3 years, I had lunch and dinner for free, learning the peak service times and the dead zones. I even got along with some of the cafeteria workers and custodial crews. Something tells me that a lot of these are going to feature students rather heavily, because those poor sons of witches are just so very good at grabbing every free item and stretching every coupon to its absolute limit. Spoken from experience. The thing we clocked in on when I worked at Kmart would round to the closest quarter hour. So by clocking in 8 minutes early and clocking out 8 minutes after my shift, I got paid for 30 minutes rather than for 16 minutes. By exploiting this, I was paid 2.5 hours of overtime a week. Cumulatively, during my time there, this added up to about 6.5 weeks of extra pay. I wasn't ever caught, though. When I was a kid, there was a payphone down the street that if you put a quarter in and made a call that no one answered, it would give you 2 quarters back. I went there all the time and called home when I knew no one was there to answer. I worked out how to get the jackpot every time on Connect 4 fruit machine in a pub I used to drink in. It would cost me about £5 to £10 before you'd get into the bonus round, and then when you did, you'd play a Connect 4 game against the machine. You placed the first counter, then after the machine placed the next counter, you mirrored the machine's move. Every game ends in a draw, and you win the jackpot, which was £50. The pub landlord removed the machine after about 3 months as it was regularly empty, basically paid for my drinking and more for 3 months. I used to work at Redacted Coffee Chain like 7 years ago, and they used to print these receipts where if you filled out a survey, it would give you a 6-digit code, which you could then exchange for a free drink. However, when you gave in the receipt with the code, we'd just toss it in the garbage and then give the free drink. So over a shift, I'd just keep all the survey receipts when people didn't want them, write random numbers on them, then keep a wallet full of free coffee. Since I already got tons of free drinks, I'd just give them to homeless people and explain it was good for a free coffee. I probably gave away like 100. In high school, our PE grade was based on improvement. We took a skills test at the beginning and another at the end, and your grade was based on how much you improved. So once I learned that, I always sucked at the first test and then did miraculously better at the second, so I had a massive improvement and thus a better grade. I got keys to a new flat on a Friday afternoon. The place had electricity, but it wasn't in my name. I went to the electric company just before closing, and the lady said, "Flat 8, you say? We only have records of 7 flats in that building. Tell you what," she glanced at the clock, "come back Monday with the serial number on your meter and we'll get you all hooked up." I never went back, and I enjoyed free electricity for over 2 years until I moved out. This was originally a large single-dwelling property that had been converted into flats and apartments. My one, I guess, was a late addition, and I was the first tenant. It simply wasn't registered to me or anyone. I went to a sporting goods store and they asked me for my phone number when I was paying. I was in a bad mood and I didn't want to fight with the clerk, so I told them our local area code plus 555-1212, which is the old number for directory assistance. The clerk accepted it and I left. When I checked my receipt, I had a huge number of loyalty points, because apparently a ton of other people did the same thing. I called the office the next day and switched the account to my new address. A half dozen times over the next few years, I went and got free stuff with all the points that I had kept racking up as one of their most loyal customers. Because I was a good student and rarely got into trouble, I was allowed to have my own phone extension to my room. So if I was out past curfew, I'd call home. When my mum answered, I'd say, "It's for me, I've got it," and she'd think I was up in my room. It was 1976. My mum never knew. I know that because I confessed to it years later. She was very shocked and mad, and she tried to ground me. But I was 40 and had my own house by then. My parents were the early-to-bed and early-to-rise type, and my room was a converted attic 2 floors up from the rest of the bedrooms. I often came home after everyone else was asleep because I had a part-time job, so I was used to sneaking in like a ninja. It was a bright yellow princess phone. And finally, I knew I had a sweet deal, so I didn't overuse that technique, just a few times when it was absolutely necessary, like the time we hitchhiked to see Peter Frampton. Haha, my sweet ride is still ongoing. Thanks to a charge card, I was granted top-tier elite status with the hotel chain. I downgraded 6 years ago, but the status remained. The hotel chain went through a merger, but since I'd retained the status for over 10 years, I was given lifetime top status in the new program that was created. My family used to go to this campground in the summer and rent a little cabin for like a week. In the main building, there was a little arcade, mostly older games and a foosball table and an air hockey table. What most people didn't know was the air hockey table was broke. If you put quarters in, you could push the plunger to start the machine and then get your quarters back if you did it just right. A couple of years in a row was super fun because me and one other kid that knew would keep the air hockey going for the entire time. The arcade would be filled with kids who'd often play other games while waiting their turn at air hockey. The campground must have found out after a few years though, because one year we went back and it was fixed. The arcade was also a complete ghost town from that point on, and the campground made no money off it after that. That's when I fully realized and understood the concept of a loss leader at like 13 years old. My old job, I worked at a pretty large gym, gold level, like the 3rd highest. The monthly fee was like $79 for the gold membership, but employees got free diamond membership. I worked there for a year and a half before I quit, but my account was never deactivated. Been going there for a while, completely free, still not found out. Diamond membership is like $200 a month. I mean, the whole free factor is nice for sure, but from my limited experience with gyms, that elite status means what? Free coffee and you get to use the poorly maintained steam room? You've got a good thing going. I'm just saying that none of the gyms I've seen with tier systems are worth what you pay for the upper tiers. I used to work for the BBC. They have, as you'd expect, their entire archive digitized. I was working on some cloud stuff, so I needed to access it to check some access rights. This was literally everything ever shown on the BBC, ever downloadable, in a ton of video and audio formats. iPlayer is just a fraction of what was in that archive. It took them about 6 years after I left to remove my account. So 6 years of free access to probably the largest TV and movie database around. For those asking, I used it to mainly watch documentaries. I'm a bit of a history bore, so I'd just search something like World War I and see what popped up. You could download as video or audio. I'd drop stuff out as MP3s and then listen to it in the car. Yes, it was called Redux, and good to see other ex-BBC people who had access to it for years. You had to pay for a TV license in the UK. It's awful to be forced into, but that does mean that there are 0 adverts on the channel, which is nice when you're watching a program. And yes, BBC these days also stands for something else. Hilarious. When Lyft first came out, they were giving away free rides for like $20 to $30 if I remember correctly. All you had to do was refer a friend. So, me and my college roommate just made a few email addresses and somehow my free rides glitched, and I just kinda had free rides for the year. I had free Uber rides for about 2 months due to some other glitch. I felt bad, but then all the sexism scandals came out, so I ordered Ubers for my husband to go to work too. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in college, they had this deal where if you signed up for a free trial of Netflix, you'd get a $10 gift card for Papa John's. They didn't even ask for a credit card back then, just an email. So I'd make up a new email address to use and get a code every time. Not only did I get free Netflix for a while, but I also got a lot of free pizza. I had a killer racket in school where I'd buy the graduating class's used textbooks for like $5 and then sell them to a third-party bookseller in the next town over who'd pay me between $25 and $30 for each one. Eventually people started asking questions and others figured out the deal. Oh well. Parking meters took credit cards. but they weren't actually connected to a live network at all times. The machine just confirmed the card number was valid and not expired, then spat out a valid pass. So, when my card number got stolen and replaced, I kept my old cancelled card. Of course, when the system tried to run the card later, it would be declined. My car and I were long gone by then. Sadly, they wised up and now it charges your card before giving you a pass. I can't believe I got away with it. My mum gave me £20 to buy a big thing of a certain kind of cat food, which normally costs £10.99. Now, here's the thing. When I entered the store, I was given a coupon for £5 off that particular brand of cat food. The store also had a special going for £5 off the kind of cat food that I entered for. I got to the till and the food was priced at £5.99. I handed over my coupon and it was scanned so the food was 99 pence. I couldn't believe my luck because normally it says not for use in conjunction with any other offer. But here's the real kicker. The lady behind the till gave me another coupon, so you can bet your gosh darn life I went around again and left the store with £22.98 worth of cat food for $1.98 with a third coupon in my hand. The only reason I didn't keep exploiting the loophole was because I had to carry it all home on my BMX. Not intentional, but once I found out, I didn't stop. Years ago, I used my card to pay for Xbox Live during a period before I could pick up a manual 1-year subscription. But when I tried to remove my card details, it wouldn't let me and said I had to call MS directly. Being lazy but smart, I decided to just change the security numbers that were saved so it wouldn't process any future payments. And it never did. But somehow I still kept getting Xbox Live access. This went on for about 1.5 years before it stopped. I was never contacted about paying anything for what I'd used either. One week, the local Chick-fil-A put out a coupon in the local coupon magazine flyer, which was buy one, get one free, any item on the menu. Next to that coupon, they had a 50% off any menu item. I carefully checked, and neither coupon mentioned cannot be combined with any other offer anywhere on it. So I ran out to the local grocery store and grabbed a stack of these flyers. Sure enough, the next week, the offer was gone, but it was too late to stop me. I spent almost 2 years as a grad student living almost exclusively off of 128-count nugget platters that I'd get for 25% of the cost. First big platter was half off and the second one was buy one, get one free, remember? The place went under new management and they put up a sign saying they'd no longer be accepting these coupons. Not entirely sure if that was due solely to me or if anyone else was pulling the same thing. I had about 20 coupon pairs left when they shut it down. First of all, told you that there would be an overrepresentation of students in this video. Second, although this seems like a younger person's dream as well as being a financial windfall, I do have to wonder what the frickle of those chick nuggies were doing to your body. I mean, good God, that sounds like death by grease. At my old job, we had a vending machine in the basement that gave change back when you bought something. Sometimes it gave you more than you paid. No one used this machine as the basement was being reconstructed, but it was regularly filled. It went on for about 1.5 years, and I don't know what happened to the machine. It was just gone one day. Someone could have caught on, or it could have been because construction was finished. I probably made $500 to $700 in cash back, and at one point I actually had a sack of coins. Part-time retail worker for a big chain. Work gives employees a 5% discount over all purchases, increasing to 10% on store products. Gift cards are store products, so are vegetables and lots of groceries. By paying $45 on a $45 gift card and then using said card for my shopping, I could purchase $55.55 in groceries for an effective 19% discount on almost all of my essential shopping, and 14.5% on everything else. I have on occasion bought a card online on my phone while queuing at the checkout. 4 years strong, and I'm still wondering when they'll realize that they're giving me a discount on money. On the original Kindle, you could purchase a book with an expired card and Amazon would send you the book. A minute later, you'd receive a notification saying the payment didn't go through. You had to select something stating you were aware of this, and then they would take the book back. If you hit the home button, it took you out of the notification and you could continue reading the book, unaware that the payment didn't go through. I did this once a month my junior year in high school. The summer before senior year, I couldn't do it anymore. Coincidentally, my passion for reading died around the same time. My first credit card ever when I was 18, many moons ago. I opened a bank account and they sent me a CC. I used it for just shy of 2 years, all sorts of stuff, my first apartment, which was baller, and I never got a bill. Bought nice clothes, systems, subscriptions, food, you name it. Never got a bill. Went to the bank one day to deposit some money and I asked when my new card was coming. My old one was about to expire and they said, What credit card? You aren't supposed to have this. They took it on the spot and I never got a bill. Tens of thousands of dollars easily, all for free. There's an app for a local burger chain where it allows you to roll the dice to get a code for a free double patty burger upgrade. It was designed so you could only try it about once per day and even shows the date of the roll on the code so the cashier could verify it. However, I found out that you can just change the date on your phone and try again immediately. If you got nothing, you'd change it back again and just keep going until you got the code. Then when you got the code, you'd change the date back to the current date, and the app updates the code so it looks like you rolled it today. I got free burger upgrades for years until they finally got rid of the feature altogether. I don't know if anyone ever figured out this exploit or if they removed it for other reasons. It was only once. I bought a game license on Steam for a game which was on a different launcher. Tried out the game, didn't enjoy it and refunded it. Later I checked the alternate launcher, and while Steam gave me the money back, they never actually cancelled the license at the other company. I got a game with its newest expansion worth $70 for free. It was The Elder Scrolls Online. To be specific, I got the base game and Skyrim when it was literally released just for a few days. 2 from college, not exactly loopholes, but playing the system. Pizza chain had coupons printed on their larger boxes. With 10 coupons, you could get a free cheese carry-out pizza. I used to raid every single trash can of their pizza boxes in the dorms or offer to throw away someone's box for the coupons. I rarely paid for a pizza, but got plenty of cheese carryouts for free. Campus Paper printed a coupon for 2 free game tokens in the bowling alley and arcade in the student union. Limit of 1 coupon per day. I got a stack of coupons, free campus paper. Twice a week I had to go through the student union for class and was usually with a friend. She was a good sport, and the 2 of us cashing in the coupons meant 4 game tokens a day, 8 per week. I made her a pair of earrings out of the 2 game tokens for being a good sport. Whole Foods used to have bacon on the breakfast bar. Cooked bacon weighs almost nothing. I'd get a pound of cooked bacon for $8, and it lasted almost a week. Bacon crumbles for the salad, for the turkey sandwich, and the other 100 things you can toss bacon on. I used this method for almost a year, and then they stopped putting bacon out. There used to be a third-party warranty you could get at Newegg that was called replacement or refund. It was for laptops that were under $500. The warranty cost like $75 for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, I'd file a claim for whatever small thing was wrong with the laptop, headphone jack, card reader, bad key, stuff like that, and I'd send it to them and they'd refund me for the full $500. Then I'd just buy a different laptop and get the warranty again. I rolled the same $500 for 3 different laptops. I basically rented a laptop from Newegg for $37 per year. I photoshopped a college parking pass to hang in my rearview mirror, complete with a fake barcode. I even had it laminated. Free parking for 3 years, and I saved $250 per year. Folks, if you really want to try this, you're welcome to, but the narrator is going to stress that the downsides of being caught are probably pretty hefty, and could be classified as forgery of college documents, and your car would probably get towed into the bargain. So you'd maybe get a slap on the wrist, or maybe expulsion or charges if you got caught. I've always lived in a different town or city than where I work. I've also always worked in an industry that gives preference to my co-workers who are parents. I learned early on that when asking for time off, I listed going out of town as reasoning that there would be no question or hesitation to grant the time off. I'm rarely ever traveling, as that label suggests. I'm merely at home, in another town. I have one co-worker I've told, but the vast majority have yet to ever figure out the system. When I was an unemployed college student, and before public transport tickets became electronic where I live, I used to cover my ticket in a thin layer of glue, a glue stick, so that when I validated the ticket, the ink would stay on top of the glue layer. I'd then wash the ticket very carefully with water, and the ink would come off. I'd let it dry, and I magically had a brand new ticket. This would last about a week before the ticket started looking too weird. My friend used to restock contraceptive machines in pubs and collect money from them. The machines would always break and get jammed all the time, but because it was Jimmy's, no one would ever tell someone that the machine ate their money. He'd just count how many rubbers were gone and give that amount of money to the company and then pocket the rest. When did someone fail to bring up info that completely blew their case in court? The opposing counsel asked, "Isn't it true that you hit the victim in the face with a brick?" The client said, "Nah, Marcus hit him with the brick. I hit him in the back with a piece of wood." A friend of mine's case is a public defender. A girl was busted on possession charges and told him she didn't have any on her when they arrested her. He thought, okay, we'll use that. Turns out she didn't have any on her when they arrested her because she'd just sold it all to an undercover cop. This particular specimen had sent a photo of his victim's beaten face to them with a message saying something along the lines of, "Do you want this to happen again?" He came across very well in court up to that point, but his mask slipped when that evidence came out. Oh, one custody case. The client failed to tell me he was previously convicted of all sorts of awful things against his family in the past. Lawyer in the UK. I acted for a member of a famous pre-vert hunting group. My client was charged with various offences relating to his vigilantism, most seriously causing grievous bodily harm with intent. He wanted me to fight the case on a public interest defence point that isn't available to him in statute or at common law, contrary to my advice. I followed his instructions, as I'm bound to do. If the state won't punish the creeps properly, then it's left to men like my client to take the law into their own hands, which I knew was a horsecrap argument for a whole host of reasons. His laptop was seized by the police and submitted for forensic examination. He had a staggeringly huge database of incriminating material on it. He himself, as it turns out, was the worst-case example of the kinds of people he claimed to be hunting. My house was robbed. In addition to all of the stuff the thief took, he also stole a bunch of my suits and all of my neckties. I had a big collection, like 100 or so. However, the thief left fingerprints on a hard plastic box that I kept spare change in. Fast forward 3 months, the thief is caught in the act of robbing another house in the same neighborhood, same detectives on my case, and this new theft. They fingerprint the guy, and the fingerprints match the ones from my house. At the thief's arraignment, I see him stroll in wearing my suit and tie. I tell the district attorney. He says there's really no way to prove that it's mine. However, the tie he chose to wear was a one-of-a-kind street map of San Francisco, and I still had all the documentation to prove it. The district attorney's eyes widened and he informed the judge. The judge has the thief placed under arrest again for possession of stolen property. The thief's lawyer was dumbfounded. It was a nice end to a rough situation. I mean, my goodness, that was a freaking bold move on the thief's part. Even if it hadn't been for the tie, mocking the person you've wronged to their face like that was hardly subtle and is yet another point of contention in their case, especially if the original owner's DNA was all over the suit. A company I worked for at the time was doing due diligence before acquiring a small tech startup. The COO of the tech startup was a well-liked guy in the company, friendly and outgoing, though I'd heard rumblings that he was rather hands-on with the work and with female employees. Apparently there was a walk-away package proposed to the guy that would let him keep a sizable portion of his post-acquisition bonus because a young woman who'd worked in the sales department had filed HR complaints against the COO and obtained counsel. I sat on the meeting with the COO and the company's retained lawyers while they grilled him about his contacts with the young woman. He denied ever having contact with her within the company without multiple other people present. Those people said his behavior towards her in meetings didn't raise any flags. He emphatically denied having any contact with her outside of work. The lawyers asked the questions a half a dozen different ways, and each time he denied any out-of-work contact. Later, we met with the woman and her lawyer with the COO not present. Her lawyer gives us a rather graphic card that came with a bouquet of flowers addressed to her from the COO. The guy had an account with a florist linked to his credit card. When the company retained lawyers confronted him, he said, "But I never had contact with her. It's not like I delivered the flowers myself." He got terminated for cause, so no walkaway package after that. At her request, the woman was given paid time off until after the acquisition and then moved to one of the other companies under our umbrella. Minor traffic cases can be the worst for this, believe it or not, because they're short and simple and oftentimes the client isn't there, so if you get blindsided by something critical, there's often no chance to consult with them to turn things around. I had a simple speeding case. 70 miles an hour in a 55. No big deal. If she goes on a driving improvement course, the court will usually dismiss or reduce those, since her driving record wasn't bad. When I showed up for her, I found out that she'd been driving 70 up an unplowed snow lane to get around all the other cars traveling in a lane that had been plowed because they were driving too slowly for her liking. I didn't even know it was possible to drive 70 on fresh snow. The officer stated had already cut her a break by not writing the ticket for reckless driving, and the judge politely agreed that he didn't feel comfortable reducing it under those circumstances. When I called her up after court to confirm, she did, and claimed that she had just forgotten to mention it. Now, maybe I've lived too much of my life in the South, but it just boggles my mind as a detail you'd forget when hiring a lawyer for that incident. I'd have told her in advance that hiring us was a waste of money, not to mention the hassle of taking an 8-hour class. and that she probably should have just gone ahead and paid this one. I legitimately do that all the time during consults. I give my honest assessment if the case is even worth doing, and so by omitting that detail, she harmed herself for no reason. At least she took it well and didn't get defensive. A friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically, this guy took an AC unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation with no jail time. The judge was ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he'd like to say. The defendant responds, "Yeah, I don't know why they're charging me. I never touched her. I just threw the AC at her. This is bullcrap." The judge rescinded the plea deal because of the defendant's attitude and lack of remorse, who went to trial and got a year in jail. Client said his ex owed him a lot of money and that she was trying to get out of paying him back by getting a protective order against him. Seemed reasonable, so I took his case. At the hearing, it came out that they were never a couple, that he was sending adult toys to her residence on a weekly basis, and that she had never asked for the thousands of dollars he gave her over the years. She was an exotic dancer. We lost, he got laughed out of court, and he learned a valuable lesson. Tell your lawyer the good and the bad stuff before trial. There's so many. My guy in a custody battle where the opposing party claimed that he had a drinking problem and he denied it 1,000%. Even after the real talk I have with him, asking him not to hide stuff from me and to be honest, we went into court and at cross-examination the opposing party provided video evidence of him finishing work, driving to an abandoned parking lot to drink a few tall boys, and then going to pick up his kid from school. Every single access visit. He not only didn't tell me that, he forgot to mention that his ex's brother owns a private investigator firm. That frickin' idiot. Our guy filmed his offenses for his YouTube channel. The cops didn't even know. A witness brought it up on day 3 of the trial. It was a nice quick change of plea that afternoon. I was a paralegal. It was a negligence case. The client argued that a lack of streetlights and a cyclist he couldn't see was responsible for him hitting a wire pole. Upon discovery, the first respondent's report indicated that they found the driver in the driver's seat, pants down, with adult material playing on the phone. It wasn't difficult to figure out who was negligent at that point. An employment case. We got to the deposition of my client and everything got set up. The first question was, "Please state your name." The client immediately looked at me and says, "Can we take a break?" We do, and she pulls me out to the hall to tell me she's lied to me about her identity. She's apparently a serial fraudster and has changed identities 7 times since the 90s. She apparently thought that the other attorneys had somehow figured it out, and that's why they asked the question. Oh boy, what do you even do when that comes up? Can you even argue the case and not face some sort of peril when it comes to your law license? It's such weird territory, I'm not sure if I've seen anything this crazy even on TV. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. He swore up and down that he had never filed before. So you can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He had personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered. I'm a court-appointed attorney for qualifying individuals in family matters. Termination of parental rights case. I'd been fighting to argue that the parent was stable, working lawfully, had a suitable apartment, doesn't need psychotropic meds anymore, was ready to be a parent. All the good stuff. After a few months of negotiating with all the parties and Department of Children, court services, we have a pre-trial to try and convince the guardians. I met with my client before the hearing to see if anything had changed. Nope, all good, let's get my kids back. Great. That's not happening on our first day, but let's try anyway. We get to court, and my client, who's kind of hot-headed and quick to anger, gets riled up and goes off on the guardians. Screaming in open court, it doesn't end there. It gets revealed that 1. They're no longer working, 2. No longer in their apartment, 3. Doesn't want to have a relationship with the guardians despite her kids loving them, 4. Won't send her kids pictures of the toys they miss and can't have, 5. Plan on moving out of state, and 6. Thinks they can live as a family off state aid when she gets them back. And she's 4 months pregnant, all in the matter of 15 seconds. I was too shocked to even react. speechless. My client was working really hard to get everything right and legitimately had everything going for her prior to this hearing. I wasn't making false representations or trying to get a monster reinstated. This was a true bombshell, as I did my due diligence to make sure things were on the up and up and the statutory requirements were met. Things fell apart very fast, apparently. This was very atypical. Parents typically do a really good job working hard to meet their requirements. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The son of the opposing party, and presumably the party themselves, lied about the son being blind to make him seem more sympathetic as a witness. We didn't know either until he took the witness box. Their counsel asked him to take the oath, and he picked up the card and read it. That was the cherry on top of a series of ridiculous events. The judge dismissed the whole thing in our client's favor shortly after. I was a trainee at the time, but my boss, who was in her late 60s, said it was the most ridiculous case she had ever handled. I was expecting he easily walked up or sat down, not that he was stupid enough to actually read something out. I wasn't a lawyer in this role, but I was a law clerk. This was a typical divorce case. This particular jury trial was about splitting assets and who'd get what. It was a long, drawn-out case that took about 5 days. Right before the closing arguments, the attorneys wanted to talk to the judge. It seemed as though a couple of days prior, the couple decided to get back together. And instead of telling the judge and their lawyers, they just kept it a secret. We heard 4 days of evidence, arguments, brought in experts such as land assessors, financial planning people, and then it came out they were back together. One of the attorneys asked to be dismissed from the case immediately and walked out of the courtroom. The judge had to dismiss the jury, and the couple was adamant they didn't think that them getting back together was a detail any of their attorneys needed to know. I heard of a guy trying to appeal his disability benefit being revoked. He was supposedly a paraplegic, but the opposition had 10 minutes video footage of him walking, running, and even jumping over a fence. After the 1-minute mark, the judge said, "Okay, I've seen enough. Please leave." It was a credit card theft and fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the 80s, I was trying this guy on a CC case, and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her how she could be so sure it was my client. She looked at my client, who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable, and said, "Because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him." The jury convicted him, and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. My father's a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids, and so on and so forth. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she bent over to try to reach it from her chair. But the pen was too far away, so she stood up, bent over and picked it up, and went back to her seat as if nothing was out of the ordinary. My dad was just looking at her, and she snaps at my dad and goes, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was okay, and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her, and she then started loudly complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her. This has the same energy as a kid remembering to be hurt once they've got their sibling in trouble for hitting them. It doesn't matter if it happened or not, those reactions are so overblown as all heck to maximize parental punishment. You can't take them seriously if you see them. There's this rule you're supposed to follow when questioning trial witnesses, and that rule is to never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Despite this rule, lawyers often ask small, apparently inconsequential questions which are necessary to set the scene, but are so inconsequential or obvious that their answers are fairly presumed. This case was an exception to that general presumption. The defendant was arrested on a warrant and transported to jail. After booking him into jail, the officer returned to his vehicle and discovered a baggie of substances sitting right in the middle of the back seat. The defendant was charged with possession. At trial, the officer explained that he routinely searched his vehicle before his shift started and after any time he transports someone in the back seat. The defense attorney tried to poke holes in the story, but the officer's testimony was remarkably consistent. The officer was fastidious about checking his vehicle. The appearance of substances coincided with the defendant's presence in the vehicle. Then, as the defense attorney was running out of questions, he threw out the question. Was there anyone else in the backseat of the vehicle? It was a Hail Mary. Even when there are multiple arrests, police tend not to transport more than one arrestee at a time if they can help it. There was no reason to believe anyone else could have feasibly been in the backseat with the defendant. Though it's no surprise to you, the defense attorney and prosecutor were stunned when the answer came back as yes. It turns out the defendant was with his girlfriend when he was arrested, and the officer courteously agreed to drive her to her apartment before taking her boyfriend to jail. This fact was not included in the police report. The officer never told the prosecutor, and shockingly, the defendant never told his attorney. There was a palpable pause as this fact sunk in for everyone. Since there was another person in the back seat, there was more than enough reasonable doubt. Proofs were concluded and the prosecutor threw out a half-hearted closing. The not guilty verdict was a given. Because of this case, I learned to never assume a fact no matter how obvious it might seem. So the case was that woman A had hit woman B in the head with a heavy beer pint at a bar, and woman B got pretty serious injuries. The defense claimed that woman A hadn't hit anyone with the pint, but instead had just thrown the pint in a random direction and it happened to hit B in the head. Thus, it was an accident and not battery. Well, the prosecution had a CCTV tape from the bar and it was shown at the trial. And the tape clearly showed in glorious high definition as A walked behind B and smashed the pint to her head so hard that the pint shattered on impact. I looked at the defense lawyer and his jaw almost literally hit the table. The prosecutor also noticed this and asked something along the lines of, "So, thrown, huh?" And the defense lawyer said that due to technical difficulties, he couldn't get the CCTV tape to open on his computer when he was reviewing the evidence. Woman A was found guilty. So yeah, I was completely dumbfounded. My father was working as a fraud investigator for an insurance company. He's got a few stories, here's two of them. A guy was claiming theft of multiple items, but mainly a ring. Things weren't adding up, so my dad and the insurance company's lawyer decided to do a depot of him. Guy shows up and is doing the depot when my dad notices the guy's wearing the exact ring he's claiming was stolen. My dad slid a note to the lawyer telling him the guy was wearing the ring, and once the note got slid, the guy realized what happened and put his hands under the table and took the ring off. They asked him to stand up, and lo and behold, the ring fell to the ground. Another guy is claiming a break-in and theft. Immediately, things weren't adding up as the window was broken out instead of in. The guy submitted Polaroids of items he claimed were his, like TVs and such. Thing is, in the Polaroids, you could see the reflection of the store they were in on the glass. He also claimed numerous CDs and records, but oddly enough, every single one started with an R, S, or T. We're talking hundreds of CDs and records. My dad was about to deny the claim in person, but noticed he had a weapon on the table, so decided to do it over the phone. Ready for an escalation? Later, the same guy was arrested for beheading a working girl and throwing her head in the river. Oh, the one I saw was simple. Now you put it that way, maybe I did hit the car. Simple is good. This one was the start of the end of my marriage. My husband lost his job in the title and mortgage business. Applied for unemployment, got denied. I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them to fire you?" He says, "No, absolutely not. They fired him out of nowhere." The hearing day comes, he testifies under oath that he did nothing wrong and was a good employee with no issues. Upon cross-examination, the other attorney pulls out documents from one of his real estate closings. Documents that he forged and backdated. He had to admit he perjured himself. Needless to say, he didn't get unemployment and he didn't sleep at home that night. I was about to complete a land transaction which required my client to have built a road. Indeed, the entire point of the transfer was the road. My client, as I called him prior to completion, said, so it kind of turns out we, didn't build the road." God damn it, Paul, you had one job. This is the sort of statement you make when you were meant to bring snacks for a party, not when you're involved in an expensive land deal. Like, did the contractor run off with the money, or was the client just that grossly disorganized? This was my mentor's case, and the reason you never ask questions that you don't already know the answer to in court. During the trial with the judge on a divorce matter, the wife brought up that he had physically attacked her during the course of their marriage. Client whispers to my mentor that's absolutely not the case. On the stand, during his portion of the testimony, my mentor asks, "At any point in the marriage did you lay hands on your wife?" He says, "Oh, only one time. We were having an argument and I held her down on the couch until she stopped arguing with me." What? My mentor said it was like he could see it happening in slow motion and all the alarm bells were going off in her head because he had never mentioned this and apparently to him, this was completely fine. The judge gave the wife a lot of money as a result and the husband was baffled. My mentor was fuming. The husband admitted this was the only time he had laid hands on her. My mentor was more angry because she had thought the case was in the bag, since the wife had abandoned the kids with her husband to run off with her lover down in Florida and literally only came back to the state to get the divorce done. The husband had been noted as being a great dad to the kids and a good figure in the community, hence why she was so damn shocked at his answer. I went to court over a ticket. A lady was in front of me for a DUI and hit and run. The judge assigned a lawyer for her since she was so shook she quit her job. The judge asked the prosecuting attorney for details on the case, and she legitimately says, "Oh, you mean that car I hit while I was drunk?" The judge stops. He took his glasses off and said, "Everything is recorded in this courtroom. I told you not to talk to anyone about your case except the attorney that I assigned for you." You could tell he was ready to walk out of the room with the level of stupidity this lady showed. What's the wildest info that a student dropped when asked a fun fact about themselves? I teach middle school and this one still takes the cake. He said that his mum and dad have the same parents. I asked him to clarify because I didn't understand what he was saying and he said, "I only have one set of grandparents, they had the same parents." I quickly moved to the next student so no one else would realize that this kid just told the class that his parents were siblings. I talked to him about it the next day in private and he said that he got it mixed up. His parents don't have the exact same parents, they shared a dad. I felt so much better when the mum called me to let me know her elderly stepfather married her husband's elderly mother after they were born. Still weird, but much better. I had a student tell me that sometimes his dad got drunk and asked his mum for things. As I was starting to tell him to stop and that he didn't need to elaborate any further, he continued with, "Like soup?" and then he yells it, like, "Soup!" It took every bit of restraint not to laugh. It's been years and years since that happened, but I still laugh whenever I think about it. Not a teacher, but this happened when I was 17 at school camp during a bonding exercise. The teacher said, "Tell us 2 truths and 1 lie about yourself, and we have to guess the lie." And this one weird kid went, "I like PlayStation, I like Doritos, and I'm an alcoholic." The teacher said, "Oh, well, the lie is clearly that you're an alcoholic." "Got ya, I play Xbox." My gosh, the look on that teacher's face. In my public speaking class at a community college, we had to get up and do a speech about an experience that really changed our lives, or an important memory and how it made us who we are. On the first day, a guy who was a veteran volunteered to go first. He proceeded to talk about the day he was captured and a victim of the unspeakable act by an enemy soldier, and how he now goes around and helps other soldiers with the Wounded Warrior Project. It was difficult for anybody to follow that. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. "My arm is effed, y'all," in the deepest southern drawl, and proceeded to wildly swing his effed up arm around. He was 12 and had Erb's palsy and also got detention that day. He might be one of my favorite students. Not a teacher, but I just did a first aid course. During introductions, say your name and 1 fact about yourself, etc., this one dude said proudly that he had over 300,000 of unpaid parking tickets. Is that possible? Isn't there a certain point where you just get arrested? Not that I think you should enforce that much debt on people. Surely their car should have just been impounded long before that. Once we were going around a circle during percussion camp in the front ensemble, and my teacher goes, "Hello everyone, my name is Paul and I've crapped my pants as an adult." That was definitely one of the weirder ones that I've heard. I just said my dad steals cars. It was something my parents always told us growing up as a joke. The teacher just laughed and said, "That's nice, sweetie." A student told me that there was a chapter dedicated to him in dental surgery textbooks because of a very rare disorder that he had as a child. I might still have that essay. My brother had something like this. When he was somewhere around 9 or 10 years old, he'd had to have 12 teeth surgically removed. He just had too many growing too quickly. It was so crazy that the oral surgeon apparently negotiated a deal with my father. The surgeon would completely pay for my brother's surgery in exchange for taking a couple of extra x-rays and lots of photos, to be published in an academic journal of some sort. During French class, a guy in my class said that he liked stabbing children. He meant that he fences, but didn't know the exact translation for that. During an introductory activity for my new class, a boy aged 9 got up and said, "My dog has to wear a cone on its head because Dad had his bollocks cut off." I was an ESL teacher in Indonesia, and a student once told me every morning she cleaned the doo-doo on her bed. I asked her to clarify, worried that she had a serious digestive issue. She answered, "I brush my teeth, wash face, and clean bedsheet." Her accent made the word sheet sound like a different word. A kid in my kindergarten class said, "My pee-pee fell off at Disneyland." I did not ask any follow-up questions. Not a teacher, but a few years ago on the first day of school, this kid in one of my classes casually answered, "I have a restraining order on my dad." That's actually a smart move. Now everyone in class knows that his father can't come and pick him up. My dad clogged the toilet this morning and that's why I'm feeling frustrated, said a 5-year-old child. I will say the question was, how are you doing this morning, but I could barely keep from laughing out loud. I have IBS. My toddler once told visiting friends that, Daddy takes long poops. I mean, I was having a flare-up and had some extended bathroom sessions, but dang, little dude, not cool. I'm terrified and amused about what he might share at school in the near future. I'm not a teacher, but I was a helper in a middle school classroom. A teen who seemed uninterested said with no hesitation that she could chug an entire bottle of beer. She got expelled later that year for keeping substances in her locker. I'm not a teacher, but this guy in my class named Shane has this medical condition that causes him to grow tons of hair at an early age. Full beard in middle school. He'd say, I'm Shane and I'm very hairy. A student once told my wife that her daddy had a very special device that he had to blow into to start his truck. We did one of those 2 truths, 1 lie bits. A girl stood up and said, I've never been out of the country, I'm a twin, I love playing sports. I knew this girl beforehand and she didn't have a twin, so I picked that one. Nope, she had a conjoined twin that died in utero and had to be surgically removed, and she's now missing the last vertebrae on her spine. Showed us the scar and everything. Apparently the lie was the first one, as she had been to Mexico. I had a student say a really similar thing. They said, I really like reading books. I had a stroke 3 years ago, and I'm a triplet. This was the first few days at a new school for me, and his twin sister was in my class, so I was like, he's a twin, right? Nope, they're triplets, but his brother's in a different school because he's incredibly smart. This kid was in a special program 1 day a week because he was smart too, so his brother must have been a genius. His sister just sat there like, yep, one brother's a genius and the other's brilliant, and I'm just me. She was a fantastic kid but had a lot of self-esteem issues for obvious reasons. The lie was that he liked reading books. True that he'd had a stroke as well. I teach ESL, and every lesson we start the class by sharing something good that happened to us over the last week or so. Needless to say, kids share the most random things ever. I have many weird stories because of that. We enforce a rule that they need to share good things so they don't start one-upping each other over whose grandma had the worst death. And one day a student said, I was riding my bike over the weekend when I fell. I could see where it was going, but didn't have enough time to try and enforce the rule when he just spat out, I fell over a wired fence and cut my neck, and it just kept gushing blood. A lot of blood. I reminded him that we were only sharing good news when he said, it's good because I'm still alive. I had a good laugh and agreed, but the damage was done. Every kid after him wanted to share about the most horrific injury they had or witnessed. A kid shared that he'd been to juvie multiple times and was currently on probation. Then he pulled up his pants enough so that everyone could see his ankle monitor. That was something. Not me, but my brother. He told the class, last night my family ate beaver for dinner. I was much older and had left home by this point. The class laughed and the teacher accused him of lying. The principal was brought into it and my mother had to go in for a meeting. She chewed them up one side and down the other because we had a cousin who was a trapper and he had sent a batch of beaver thighs for the family to enjoy. And although my brother was telling the truth, he told me later that he did say it for the effect of disrupting the class. Well, is it weird that now the narrator is just kind of wondering what beaver tastes like? And no, not that kind, you preverts. I'm genuinely curious about the actual animal in this story. I mean, you're killing them anyway, why not eat them too? My friend is really quiet. He doesn't really talk unless talked to. He's really cool though and has some things he enjoys doing. Literally second year I knew him, the teacher asked him to drop a fun fact about himself, and he said he's a professional bowler with a 300 best, and I was like, why haven't you told me this? That's amazing! I guess it just never came up. I knew him for a whole year and I never knew that. Had students, aged 11, sharing strategies for dealing with difficult emotions, one at a time in a big circle. One girl talked about digging her nails into her face whenever she was feeling stressed or anxious, and I had to explain to the class that that was not a good coping strategy. When I was in my first year at university, my law and society professor made each student get up, say his or her name, and tell why they picked law school. Well, a guy got up, said his name, and the professor interrupted him by asking, "Are you related to X?" And the guy said, "Yes, professor, he's my grandfather." Then the professor got excited and started talking about what a great guy X was, and that he hadn't heard of him in years. Then the professor asked how he was, and the student replied, well, he's dead, sir." The whole class was trying to hold in their laughter. It pretty much broke the class on the first day. I'm not a teacher. This person who told the story was in a class with me as a young adult. Someone in a class told everyone about how his grandparents were arrested for keeping a bunch of adopted children in cages. He said that he used to play with the kids when he was young, but he was too young to understand that the conditions they were in weren't normal. They kept kids in cages and in locked rooms for years before they were discovered and arrested. Yeah, that was a fun fact. I've had my hand up a sheep's bum. That one shocked me slightly. Child of a farming family, helping with lambing season. I was in one of the first small required classes for my teaching degree, and everyone in the class was studying to teach. It was day 2 or 3, and we were doing a get-to-know-you activity where we shared something about ourselves. I don't remember the exact question, but it had something to do with what do you regret or take back. A guy came in late, when almost everyone has the answers to the question, and the professor asked him the questions, and he thought for a moment and said, "I regret letting my friend talk me into dropping A." The class was silent for a good 20 seconds until the professor said, "Maybe next time we only share things that are legal." I hadn't seen him in any other teaching classes since. I still laugh about it to this day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In the context of having students introduce themselves one by one to a new boy in a small high school class, a girl said that her parents got her a nose job and a chest job. That's a two-way tie for me. One was, "I have 2 thumbs on this hand," and "I'm raising cockroaches in my closet to sell to the reptile shop." My dad had a student tell him during the fun fact question in detail about how his goldfishes died that morning and how he experimented on their corpses. He had pictures on his phone of the skin off and the intact skeleton next to it. He's a successful taxidermist now, so silver linings, I guess? My first year as an earnest and ideological teacher in a very rough, underserved area. I got all the students in a circle on the first day to talk about what we'd done that summer. I pointed to a student who had been engaged with me before in class and said, "What did you do this summer that could inspire us?" His answer was, "I did the last 2 months of a sentence for stealing a car." Okay, so I hadn't expected that. I pointed to another student and said, "Okay, that's great, let's talk about what you did this summer." "Yep, I had such a good summer. I went to camp and..." Let me stop lying. "I did the last 2 months of a sentence with that guy because I stole a car with him." Okay, mine was actually cute and kind of funny. I was teaching 5th grade and this kid, white as paper, goes, "My name is blank, but you can call me LeBron." He had an obsession with LeBron James, and I did in fact call him LeBron whenever I wanted to get his attention. Great kid. I'm a teacher from the UK, form tutor to a Year 7 class, 11-year-olds. To get to know each other on the first day, I had them take it in turns to say their name, which primary school they've come from, and an interesting fact, like favourite food or colour. We get to the last kid in class, and his fact was that he had 6 fingers in one hand. Coolest kid ever. That's like my brother. He was born with 6 fingers on each hand, but he had them removed as a baby. When he found out at around age 10, he got so mad because he could have been really cool and really fast at typing. I taught elementary school in the past few years. One kid told me he was a dragon when he was born, but changed into a human as he got older. He was absolutely convinced and couldn't be persuaded otherwise. Okay, so I had psychology back in the spring semester before COVID hit, and I sat next to a girl who I was good friends with from high school. Professor asks her for a fun fact, and she said, "I like to watch people get cut open." She obviously said it for effect, but she cleared it up by saying she liked watching videos of people getting plastic surgery because it was satisfying to watch. Someone shared that when he wiped in the bathroom that morning that there was blood on the toilet paper. Huh. Introducing ourselves around our 10th grade social studies class, and my intro went, "Hi, I'm Katrina, I'm blah blah blah, and I really like trees. Like, I swear I have a tree fetish." The teacher gives me a what the frick look and goes, "Okay," and quickly moves on. I confused that word with the word obsession. Still weird, but holy smokes, I did not mean to say that I was attracted to trees that way. Not a teacher, but on the first day of 9th grade, we had to form a circle and say one thing about ourselves that we thought was unique. When it was this guy's turn, let's call him Mike, Mike stands up and says in a really serious tone, "My mum and dad grow," the word for green herb. His house got raided the next day and his dad got arrested somehow. "I know a lot about medieval torture equipment." Is it possible to be fascinated about the subject matter and not be a serial killer in the making? I guess maybe you could just be channeling it into something really alternative in the bedroom, I don't know. Even though I'm a professor, nothing that's ever been revealed by this question has ever been as awkward or uncomfortable as the occasion that happened when I was still a student. This was when I was in my MFA program for creative writing. If you've never been in an arts program before, it probably won't surprise you to learn that they can attract some weird personalities. It was the first day of a fiction workshop, and the professor decided that he wanted us all to share something interesting about ourselves. And for some reason, one girl, Ashley, decided that this would be a good opportunity for her to tell us about her long history of substance use and the equally long period of mental psychosis she went through as a result of it. She didn't do this as a quick answer either, but as a long, drawn-out list of every single substance she had ever experimented with, followed by a catalogue of every single delusion she had suffered as a result. The only one I can remember now is that at one point she became convinced she was a millionaire and that her family was hiding her money from her. All of this was delivered in a monotone monologue with her eyes glazed over that lasted at least 5 minutes, which was met at the end with a long, awkward silence before the professor said, "Well, that definitely was something interesting," and then moved on to the next person. I was teaching a 10th grade honors English class once, and this pleasant young woman busted out the C word. I hadn't had any trouble with her whatsoever, so I was a bit shocked. The whole class went silent. I told her she couldn't use that word in class, and she was confused as to which word I was referring to. Finally, I said, "The C word," and she repeated it and then admitted she didn't know there was anything wrong with it because her parents use it at home all the time. The rest of the class let her know it was bizarre that she was using it. Not a teacher, but a guy in a handful of my high school classes used to always say he met Ron Jeremy if the class was doing 2 truths and a lie. He wasn't lying and would always show the class the picture they took together. I tried to make conversation with a 6th grade boy who didn't have any friends in my class. I asked him what music he listens to, and he said, "Mukbang soundscapes." If you don't know, mukbang is when people eat a ridiculous amount of food in one setting. It was weird. I don't ask for a fun fact, but on the first day I always ask, "What's your most recent obsession?" Low stakes, building affinity networks, stuff like that. In my first semester, a student said, "air," as in, oxygen. I'm a student, and a kid in my class said that he loves chicken nuggets and then sat down and didn't say anything to anyone else for a month. I have so much admiration yet confusion for him. I have 17 piercings, but only 6 are readily visible. One guy who said, "I love," and then he said the R word. Sometimes I do it, sometimes me and my friends like to get together and listen to people doing it. Some of my favorite R worders include Tupac, Dr. Dre, Eminem, Biggie. My favorite grape song is English wasn't his first language. He had us in the first half, I'm not going to lie. I'm a trainer at a bank, and I've learned some really interesting things about my colleagues doing icebreakers. One guy used to be in a pretty successful metal band. Another one can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 2 minutes, and yes, I made him prove it. One woman was a professional pianist for a while, and another can read tarot cards. I'm seriously thinking of putting on an employee talent show. One of my students said, "You'll think less of me if you Google me." I remember one kid using this question as an opportunity to explain that he believed in the flying spaghetti monster. I'm not a teacher, but first day of high school when we did introductions, one of the popular girls said, "Hi, I'm Macy, and I'm trash. No, wait, I'm fan trash." And then proceeded to explain that she read smutty fanfics to every and any of the teachers that asked what fan trash was. We were 11, British high school. As a follow-up to the question being asked, teachers that put everyone on the spot like this? What the frick? I mean, it's mostly a thing of what can I attach to your name to make you stand out against the 200 other students that I'm teaching this semester? Also, it's a good way to burn 20 minutes of a class period when you don't know how much you should prepare for your lesson yet and you want to save going over the syllabus for a bit later. The first day of Intro to Literature during my freshman year of college. When asked an interesting fact about myself, I said, "I refuse to bungee jump." Slightly confused, my professor took the bait. He replied, "That's sort of random. Why do you refuse to bungee jump? Is it a certain fear?" To which my reply was, "To be honest with you, sir, a broken rubber brought me into this world, so I'm going to make damn sure one doesn't take me out of it." Luckily, the professor was a chill guy. The entire class exploded with laughter, and it was a good time. After a winter half-term, the teacher asked us all, "How was your break?" My class got silent for a few glorious seconds, and when it was my turn, I said, "Well, my granddad died and my dad got married." Yes, in that order. My teacher asked my mum if it was true at a parent evening a few days later. "Sorry for the response you got, Mr. Moore." My friend, when asked this question, said that tickling his pickle was his passion. I had a student who had an identical twin brother 2 years younger than him. His dad was a pro athlete who had the money to freeze an egg after the embryo split. His wife then carried both at separate times. I had an in-depth conversation with an almost 6-year-old about being a secret werewolf hunter at night. The student described how they tracked and often made friends with werewolves. Also demonstrated a stunning amount of knowledge about the moon. And for folks wondering about the vibrant lying, this is very typical for young students and one of their relational avenues for assessing adult reactions. And imaginative storytelling is an important developmental trajectory. At certain points, children start telling stories that they themselves know aren't true, which can be super annoying, and is also a wonderful window into a particularly complex part of cognitive development. He shared the fact that he had a TV in his bedroom. He was 17. I think his name was Carter. He stood up and said, this was in college by the way, "One time I did the deed with a girl in the bathroom." He was expelled. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.